Yo.
Hey, what's up, man?
Oh, one sec. I have you on speaker. Not much. What about you?
I'm doing fine, actually. Yeah, so we've been going on for like, I guess, 50 minutes or something, just trying to clarify a couple of things, what exactly is the debate proposition and so forth. And of course, I told you in the chat, I would be using my time doing this if it was anyone else. Like, I genuinely think that when other people are going on these semantical questions, they're trying to deflect and derail and just not want to actually engage in something substantive. But because it's you and you're generally speaking a good faith debater, I was like, okay, got you. About the NTT stuff,
Well, wait, before that, one sec. So,
you
firstly,
said that. Go
firstly,
for it.
thank you. I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that. That's kind of you. And I agree that some people do that. We might disagree about what percentage it is or something, but there's certainly people who are just
Yeah.
trying to gum up the works. But I think it's pretty easy to look at the conversation we had. And sorry, I'll let you continue with NTT. I think it's pretty easy to look at the conversation we had and see that there's a progression, right? That's always the giveaway of, are things getting cleared up and you're actually moving forward, or is it just infinitely being stuck? Well, I guess that's not always a giveaway, because sometimes it's actually legitimate to be infinitely stuck if one guy's not making sense. But anyway, I think there's a clear progression. And also, before you continue,
Yeah.
what should I refer to you as? I've heard you called Apollo. I see your TKA
Yeah,
on
I'm
here.
Apollo.
That's what you prefer?
TK just stands for the King Apollo. Don't worry
Oh,
about that shit. But
okay.
yeah, Apollo. You should call me that. Yeah, that's
Okay,
the
yeah, sorry. Go on with what you're
name of
saying
the.
about NTT.
Oh yeah, so you're talking about the idea of, well, the answers or the replies to the NTT question. It usually collapses into either of these two categories or something, whereas it's either the facts that the reply is absurd or contradicts. Right?
Yeah, and just because others might listen to this, I sorry, I should have mentioned I'm recording it, so I might, if it's a good conversation, I might put it on the backup channel, if
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
okay.
If, just to be clear, if we actually have a disagreement on something which is worthy of debating upon, then I'll get some people perhaps in the server or in the server to record the conversation. Just to be clear on that.
You can also take
Right
my
now we're just trying to
recording.
establish some. What's up?
I said you can also take my recording. I don't mind that. As long as
Okay,
you don't
got you. Cool.
upload it with some hilarious, ridiculously uncharitable title or something, like pull a monkey boy or something. But yeah, you're free to use
Yeah,
mine
Monkey
though.
Boy is like autistic, genuinely. Like he doesn't want to debate me at all cost. Also, he like listed me from his community and shit. But for reasons like he has PTSD. But with that being said, let's just focus on the entity stuff, right? So
Sure.
yeah, so I was just going to say, you say that there replies to the question, like, for example, what's going to be the trait? And of course, you know what you mean there when you're talking about trait. In the context of the ethical conversation, you're saying
Oh, I
that
forgot the thing I was going to
generally, if not,
flag.
no,
Sorry to cut you off. I forgot the thing I was going to flag, which is just for people listening. Absurd is with respect minimally to my point of view. So we've already cleared that up in
yes,
text, but for others listening, yeah.
of course, yeah. So from your point of view, of course, the contradictory category is not indexed to your point of view. That's just from a stance-dependent position. But the absurdity point of view is just going to be something which is from your point of view, obviously, because you're talking about something being absurd. You're talking about if it is in conformity with your common sense intuitions or something like that. So that specifically would be indexed to your point of view or perspective. But the category regarding the logical contradictory nature of the response to the question, that would not be indexed to either for opponents, just to be clear on this.
Are you asking me to affirm that, or are you just stating? Um,
Yeah, of course. I'm just making that clear that the category about contradiction, that's not indexed to just your point of view or my point of view. When you're talking about your point of view, you're specifically referencing the absurdity category.
I think that's fine. Yeah, and also I said minimally my point of view. So just it's worth noting, like others who have similar preferences, or possibly even a lot of people. I suspect the same thing will be true of, but yeah, minimally my point of view. And of
Yeah,
course,
of
it's worth
course.
saying it's an
So,
induction. It's just everything I've ever seen has fallen into one of those two categories. But
mhm.
again, I've already said this
And
to
I've
you,
watched a lot of
so
your debates. I think I've watched your, well, not really a lot, but like a couple of them. I've watched your Destiny debate, I'm pretty sure. I've watched this debate you've had with this one female. Of course, she's not like someone who's philosophically inclined. Forgot her name actually. It's been a long time. But
mm,
basically, what happened was they either conceded the proposition, given the facts that you guys have very similar preferences or rather, what happened was they made some absurd sort of like conclusion or something like that on the basis of the questions and the reductios and the hypotheticals you have given in that given dialectical discourse. However, I don't believe that my response to that specific question of that nature is going to collapse into any of those categories. You can't make a criticism from your intuitions in principle, in my opinion. Well, not really an opinion, I think that's a fact, which we can get on to later on. And it is also not the case there's any sort of logical contradiction. So.
Okay, well, yeah. So I guess where I'm at is I'm skeptical of that, but I'm happy to hear
Mm-hmm.
you out. And if I don't have a reply, I might need to go think about it. But if I
Okay,
do,
sure.
I'll give a reply. And if I don't understand, I'll ask some
So,
questions.
mhm. Are you recording right now?
Yeah, I've been recording from the start. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So my response to that type of question is to simply embrace the very fact that there is
Sorry,
well,
embrace
I'll
what?
embrace two facts. I'll
Embrace what?
embrace two facts. I'll embrace the fact that there is in fact a trait which distinguishes humans from animals in the morally relevant sense, which would justify one action but not the other. However, I'll simultaneously embrace the fact that the trait is not something which I can linguistically articulate, but I have knowledge of the facts that there exists such a trait to begin with, given the evidence.
Okay, I think I hear you.
And
Sorry, yeah.
I have an example. I have like an analogy which perfectly kind of like communicates this concept. I love using this, and I've used this against like this other debater, Lucario. It's like a box analogy, basically. So, like, you have a box, a sealed box, for example, and there's something inside it, right? So you can have knowledge of the fact that there's something inside the box. By shaking the box, you're like, okay, given the sounds that are being made and the feeling I get from shaking the box and something shaking inside the box, I can come to the conclusion based on the available evidence, the empirical evidence, that there's something inside the box, but I can't tell you what specifically that object actually is. And so I just use that sort of example and just tie that back to this conversation insofar as we have evidence for there being a trait, right? The evidence would be our moral intuitions. I think that's pretty good evidence, and I can get into different interdisciplinary fields that establishes that conclusion separately. And then I use that to say that given those intuitions, I know for a fact, given the available evidence, that there is in fact a trait, and it's irrelevant whether or not I can name or tell you what this specific trait actually is. And so, from your perspective as an interlocutor, you cannot say, number one, that's an absurd conclusion because there's no reductio you can land towards that position in principle. And number two, you cannot say it's logically contradictory because there's not a conjunct of two opposing statements from that given approach to the question.
So I think I understand. I'll try to just repeat that back to you to make sure I understand. So
Gotcha.
it sounds like you're saying that you can't articulate what the trait is. I'm not sure if that's because you lack the concept yourself or you just find it difficult to articulate, but you think you can give some kind of reasoning to suggest that regardless of whether you can actually articulate it, it's there. And if that's the
Yeah.
case, then there's some reply that's neither contradictory nor absurd.
And it would still be relevant, yes. It would still be relevant epistemically speaking, given the conditions we have laid out previously in the text conversation, yeah.
Yeah, I
So what
don't.
do you think? What's your response?
Well,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that I'd point to one thing I said earlier in text, which is that the contradictory or absurd categories are for things that I understand. So it could be that I just
Okay.
don't understand. Now, you might say I guess maybe this is your whole point. Regardless of whether you understand, you should think that there's a trait and it has such and such properties, and one of them is that it's not
Uh-huh.
absurd. Um, yeah, so I don't think I have any problem with that conceptually. I mean, I don't see why I couldn't be in principle convinced of something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just think
One more
about.
thing, just to clarify, because so this response is tailored to the sort of goal or the task you're trying to accomplish in the majority of those type of debates. Again, when I was talking about the NTT argument, which you've clarified, and then just repeating this one more time for the VC purpose, right? Or for the recording purpose, right? Real quick, give me a sec. Hold on.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was just clarifying for the VC purpose that when I was talking about NTT argument, I'm not talking about the formalized version. I'm talking about the dialogue scripts, to basically
Yeah.
establish like some sort of absurd conclusion or contradictory conclusion or proposition, given the set of preferences from another different moral agent, with whom you're having a conversation with. And what I'm telling you here is simply that with respect to that goal in mind, right, that reply I've just given would not fall under either of those categories. And even though you're not able to understand the specificity of the trait because of the fact that I'm not giving you that conceptual content, it is still the case that what you do in fact understand is the sort of response that has been made to the question. And it's not as if my response to that question is unintelligible or gibberish or something which requires semantical or conceptual clarity. It's something which we both understand. And that specific response to which we both understand, which shook hands on regarding the comprehensive nature of that response, the comprehension of that response, I think that specifically would evade those two categories that you've listed in the dichotomy in the chat and in this VC conversation respectively. Sorry.
Yeah, so this is sort of the one thing that I I guess I'm not sure if we disagree about something I said, but maybe there's a disagreement. I might need to just talk for a minute to see if I can get my thoughts clear. So when I
Go for
say
it.
thank you, when I say contradictory or absurd, I am talking about the responses that I understand. So I don't think I've made a claim that the responses that I don't understand fall into one of those categories. But I'm thinking about whether I would make that claim. And I guess I'm not sure. I think some of the ones I don't understand, I'm not really sure if they're coherent. But I guess the ones that the cases where I don't know what someone is saying and I suspect they're saying something coherent, I do suspect it falls into one of those categories. So I think that means we disagree.
Okay, but you're talking about so what you're saying was the reply itself, right? So you could make an argument that whatever that trait actually is would fall under those categories, but what you specified in the chat is the reply to that question, which would be relevant to what the question actually is, would fall under those categories, not the trait which is being referenced by the reply, which is a different conversation.
Here,
So
one
I'm
sec.
taking this from a pedantic.
I'm losing track just 'cause I'm trying to draw something, which I think will make it clear what
Mhm.
I'm saying. Um,
Wait, do you
so
understand what I'm saying? Or do you want me to like repeat my points before you
I'm
give a
I'm
response? Which one
fine.
is it?
I'm fine with you repeating it, and we can pick up with your point. So I'm not trying to take
Okay,
over the conversation or something, but I also just want
got
to
you.
be clear about what I'm saying. Um,
Okay,
so
so what I'm telling you here
wait,
is,
one sec, one sec.
sorry to cut you
You're
off.
just going a bit
Go
fast for
for
me.
it.
Just 1 second. So what I'm saying is we have two categories here. I'm gonna just draw it and paste a drawing just so we're kind of clear. So we have two categories: understand and don't. And I think that these ones all are. So this is what I expressed in chat, basically. Oh wait, sorry, I pointed the arrow at the wrong thing. 1 second, let me fix that. 1 sec, I have that backwards. Just ignore that drawing. It should be like this. So yeah, that's what I expressed in chat. But I'm kind of thinking because I don't want to just because I said one thing let myself off the hook if I would still disagree with what you're saying. So I'm thinking now about the other side of the circle, which is the things that I don't understand. And I'm wondering if for all of those, I would say that they're contradictory or absurd. And
Okay, let me
I
just check the chat real quick. Like, give me a second. Hold on.
sure, yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and you see how that reflects what I said before, right? Because I was kind of saying like there's some I don't
Yeah, let me
understand.
just
Yeah,
get the message you said before, just for clarity purposes. Hold on a sec.
sure. It'll be somewhere higher, but if you search the word understand, I'm pretty sure you'll get that as like the first or second message there. Oh, I think someone found it for us. Let's see. Oh, I missed which one that jumped to. Yeah, whatever. There's a reply. I will understand, but it won't fall into either category. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so here's one of them. So you're specifically talking about the reply to the NTT question, not like the trait. So like that's just something which is compatible or identical to what I'm telling you. What I'm telling you here simply that it is the case that the reply I've given would not be absurd or contradictory or have absurd or contradictory consequences. However, it is the case that simply what you're saying there is not that the trait specifically, which would be a sort of response to the question, would be absurd or contradictory. You just said the reply or response to the question, which would be relevant. Now, I've given a relevant response to the question, which does not include any sort of specific trait given the vagueness of the conceptual content. And we both agreed a while ago that it is neither absurd or contradictory.
Okay, I feel like what I'm gonna say isn't gonna totally be a reply to what you said because I'm just a little hung up on this, but I'm happy to talk about what you
Gotcha.
said. So I'm just looking at what I've said here so far, and you get what I'm getting at with the circle, right? It's like for all the replies to NTT, I either understand them or I don't. And the claim that I made so far is of the ones that I understand, I think those all fall into the categories either of contradictory or absurd. So far, we agree that that's what's been said, yes? And then I'll
Yeah,
talk about the other side.
I'll just type another propositions in chat, of course. So universal quantifier for all of these specific responses, they're either things that you understand or you don't understand that. That's just going to be a true dichotomy. The other one is just under the disjunct, whereas you do in fact understand the response to the question, it is going to be the case that it is either contradictory or absurd. Now, I
Yeah.
given a response which we both understand, which is neither contradictory nor absurd.
Well, yeah, it depends. Well,
So
what?
that means the second prop is just false, right?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about the other side of the circle, the ones that I don't understand, and I'm thinking about whether I would say that those are all contradictory or absurd. And I don't think that I would say that because some of them I suspect are like incoherent, just to take one example. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't know. I'm not 100% sure if we're butting heads right now, but I do suspect. I guess what I want to say is like the things that are on the don't side that I suspect are intelligible, I suspect fall into one of those categories. That's sort of where I'm at. But I don't want you to think that I'm saying for all the things in the don't category, I'm also sure they fall into contradictory or
Well, I'm
absurd.
going to ask you this one
Yeah.
question. What is a sufficient condition for it to not understand something in the context of this specific conversation? What's a sufficient condition for that concept to be
Oh,
satisfied?
that's legitimately tricky. I don't know because sometimes we talk about different levels of understanding. Like you might say that I understand what a square circle is or something because I understand what it means to be square and I understand what it means to be circle. But
Yeah.
then if we're talking about understanding at the level of like being able to visualize or something, I wouldn't understand it at that level.
Yeah, this
So,
goes into the field whereas you have negative conceivability and positive conceivability. One is just going to be dependent upon visual representation of psychological states, and the other one is just going to be something which is less robust. So I think I'm going to ask you, are you going under either of these two categories, which is negative or positive conceivability, or not?
I'm not sure I followed that. Sorry.
Yeah, so like
how
on
are
the
they
square
defined?
circle example. Yeah, so okay, so just to, I think examples is the best way to just, articulate these concepts. So square circle, for instance, it's something which me and you, we both understand, like square circle insofar as it's the conjunct of two given properties or sort of like objects. However, it
Mm-hmm.
is not the case that we can visually imagine this.
Yeah.
So there are different levels or different types of understanding. One which lies in the sphere of visual representation, and the other one which lies in the sphere of just some sort of semantic content association, right? So we have some sort of meaning assigned square-like objects, circle-like objects, and we have some semantical content that's associated with the conjunct of these two things, just like how the semantical content association with the word contradiction, even though things which represents what a contradiction is would be something which you cannot visually represent, if that makes sense, which I think it does, right?
Um, I'm thinking about
I can
it.
just type it out to the chat.
Well, I don't know if you need to. I mean, I understand that
Hmm.
there's things that I understand at the level of being able to visualize, and there's things that I understand just in terms of like understanding what their properties are supposed to be, or something like that.
Okay, got
And
you.
I don't
Hmm.
know which I'm
And
thinking
so,
of. I'd have to think about which I'm thinking of when I say of the ones I don't
but it has to
understand.
be either one of these two things, right?
Visualizable or not?
Yeah, so like for
Yeah, I
example,
think so.
infinity is something which is not contradictory in mathematics, but it is something which is visually inconceivable given the limitations of the human mind. And so I would say that when you're talking about, or generally speaking, I'm not sure if you're going under the traditional notion of understanding, even by layman concepts, but I believe it to be the case that when you're talking about something being understood, what's being referenced to there is simply that you're either talking about visual conceivability or you're talking about some non-visual conceivability notion, which would be something which is identical to just something which is contradictory, like, okay, that's contradictory or whatever.
Okay, yeah,
Or there's nothing you're, yeah. Go for it. Sorry.
it's okay. Yeah, I mean, I understand that you could talk about understanding in terms of being able to visualize, or you could have some more basic criteria. And I don't know, I'd have to think about which I'm referring to, but I guess I'm just flagging whichever it turns out being. There's some kinds of things that I would want to say I just don't understand. Yeah, I'd need to think about which they fall into, but there's some kind of things that I don't want to say are contradictory or absurd because I just don't really get what they are.
And to be clear, are you agnostic on the proposition that you don't understand my response to the NTT question, or do you have a knowledge claim on that proposition?
No, I think I understand your response, but I don't understand what the trait is. So I
Okay, well, that's enough, right? Am I bugging out? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, so remember when you made the universal claim that it is the case that for all things you understand, it's either absurd or contradictory, and you agree that my response is not absurd or contradictory. So that means the claim was false.
Absurd or contradictory. I don't know if I
In
agreed
your
that it's
message, what you
not.
said was,
You're going too fast for me.
well,
Slow.
sorry to cut you off, but I want to clarify one thing. I want to say that in your message in the chat, what you said was that you think for all the replies, it is the case that they're either absurd or contradictory. You never said you think the trait which could or is referenced by the reply is something which is absurd or contradictory. And so the point
Yeah,
I'm trying
that
to make here is simply
I
that I've
understand.
given a reply which is relevant to the question, which falls underneath the category, and so the universal claim would be incorrect.
Yeah, so I'm trying to talk about the trait when I say that.
Okay, so to be clear, you agree that given the way, because I took what you were saying in the chat at face value because we've been very pedantic and careful with the terminologies and we've been very technical. So I took what you said at face value insofar as a response which is relevant. You never specified that the response has to specify a specific trait, but you just said it has to be a relevant response. And
Yeah, I
so
sort
what
of.
I've given as a
Sorry.
response to your question is relevant, and it's something which falls underneath the category. So given how you originally phrased it, it is the case that the claim would be false. Unless you want to either clarify or kind of like change the parameters of the claim you made in the chat, which we've both agreed on and have like a conversation about, right?
Yeah, so I guess I wanna divert from the conversation for a second to just talk about the meta, which I assume you won't mind because presumably we are having a good faith conversation and know we'll get back to the topic. Generally, when I take issue with meta, it's because we're not going to get back to the topic or there's no indication of that. So I kind of I feel like you feel right now that I'm trying to get you to like to show an error or something, but I don't think that I'm trying to do something
Uh-huh.
like that. I'm just clarifying how I mean things. Like I totally understand when you read that you're thinking about reply in some general way, and we've had a pretty precise conversation. I mean, I would say that we've been precise about certain aspects of what we're talking about, not that we're hyper vigilant about every
Uh-huh.
word. Like, to take one example, the
Yeah.
word relevant. I didn't care a whole lot about getting into the word relevant. So I'm not trying to catch you out or anything. I think your interpretation is totally reasonable. But I also would prefer if you don't try to catch me out like that, because the thing is, like, what really matters is just what am I actually trying to say? And on that notion, do we disagree? Who's right? Who's wrong?
So I'm not trying to basically catch you out or anything. I'm just basically I'm charitably interpreting your words, at least from my perspective,
Hmm.
but I don't want to be overly charitable insofar as I give you the benefit of the doubt and so far as that is concerned. I believe that because just to clarify, you can just agree or disagree so that I don't strawman your position. I'm pretty certain that just a moment ago you made a conditional proposition or conditional sentence that if you understand the response to the question, then it is the case that it is either absurd or contradictory. So it's a conditional sentence of the consequent being a disjunctive, which is disjunctive. It has two options, right? So
Yeah,
I'm telling you that the antecedent is
I understand what
satisfied
you're saying.
and the consequent is not satisfied. Yeah.
So I don't think you need to repeat that because I understand what you're saying. You're looking for me to
Okay.
say that what I said is false, and you're taking the
Yeah.
interpretation that I'm talking about the reply. But I'm basically saying I don't want to do that because I think it's a little unfair. Because I think what really matters is what I'm trying to get at, and I wasn't trying to get at the reply. I'm talking about what the trait is.
Okay. Well,
Which is
I'm
also, to be
interpreting
clear,
that to be
not
the
to say
reply.
that you're making an
What's
error
up?
or that you've made any kind of unreasonable assumption. I think your interpretation's reasonable enough. I just think if we have two different
Yeah.
interpretations, the thing to do is not to sit here and not to really imply you're going super hard on this, but it's not to sit here and
Hmm.
go, you admit you're wrong on my notion. No, you admit you're wrong on mine. It's just to go, okay, well what's actually being said and what do we think about on
Hmm.
that notion? So that's sort of how I would want to proceed. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I understand where you're coming from. We could just like play this sort of like semantical push and pull game on this matter and so forth. You're making this sort of interpretation, or rather enforcing or reinforcing the idea that this is what you mean by this. And I'm telling you that, hey, it doesn't seem to be the case that this is what you mean by this because you've been pretty precise in the language and from a very precise perspective on what you've been saying this far. This would be the entailment of the proposition, right? And so I don't want to debate you on what you meant because that comes off as this debate, Phil Bro, Goonish type mentality. And I really don't
Right.
want a picture like that to be painted on my reputation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'd also like to say that I think if we were to be technical from this sort of like debate and point of view, like if we were to like look at things from like usually when you have like formal debates or any sort of like official debates, whatever you want to call it, or philosophical debates, when you have a debate proposition like that, I think from that specific standard, I think it is the case that the proposition you asserted is false. I think from that standard, it would be false. Maybe people can interpret this as you hedging. I'm not making that claim, but all I'm saying here is that just from a precise perspective, just taking the same approach that both me and you've been generally taking in this specific dialect, I think that your response or your claim was false. But I don't care to really go back and forth on this regarding the semantic stuff. We can just agree to disagree regarding the interpretation stuff, even though I could even debate you on whether or not that is your interpretation, which I don't want to do, but I can easily do that if I want to, basically. But I don't want to go into this sort of debate about did AY actually meant this or that. It just comes off as, really corny. Yeah, that's why I didn't want to debate in the previous topic about the non-traditional aspect of moral subjectivism because it was just we're just going to a debate about what AOI actually means by the given terms he's using. I don't want to have those sorts of debates. I think they're not substantive. I think they're meaningless. I think there's no sort of productivity in those types of conversations or any information that me, you, or the audience would obtain from having those debates. So I try to kind of like stay away from those topics. You feel me?
I think I feel you. As long as you're not implying that I meant something other than what I meant or something like that.
Okay. So, as again, I personally believe that it is the case. This is my personal opinion, and this is not to say that you're being bad faith. It could be the case that you either forgot your original intentions of the words. It could be the case that you changed it unawarely or something. But what I believe is the case that at the time it was the message was being sent, when you made that message in the chat, I think that your intention was just to talk about the sort of responses which are relevant, which don't necessarily have to be inclusive of a specific trait being identified.
That's what
Okay.
I think, given how it has been formulated and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah. So
However, I'm not going to make the claim you're being a bad faith interlocutor. That's not
yeah,
my proposition here.
yeah, and I wouldn't say that about you either. I think you're a bit eager to get something that's kind of like a dunk, if I'm totally honest. But I don't think you're being. I would not say it's at a point of being bad faith or anything like that. And maybe you disagree with me on that. It just feels like you're really intent to get me to say I made an error, so that later you can say you made an error. But to be clear, I don't think that I made an error. I think that I was referring to traits when I said reply. So again, we don't have to hash that out, but it's just if you're gonna go, I think you probably didn't mean that, so I think you said something wrong. I'm just gonna reply, I think I did mean that, so I don't think I did say anything wrong, and we're just kind of
Okay.
butting heads there.
Okay, so hypothetically speaking, let's just look at an intuition from. Let's say hypothetically speaking, let's say we just go in a time machine and we go back in time. And for some reason, every debater that AY ever debated on veganism, whereas he runs the same script, right? They have the same response that Apollo gave in this conversation about the box example. Would you believe that it is the case that that script would be something which is successful or unsuccessful, given the fact it's going to be the same response, and you're never going to really be able to progress that sort of conversation insofar as you're able to rhetorically persuade the interlocutors of becoming a vegan, which, by the way, is the main purpose of this sort of NTT movement that you started off with some years back?
I'm not 100% sure I understood that. You're asking if I would call something success or failure. Can you maybe clarify or condense that down a bit?
Yeah, so like remember we mapped out the task
I'll
and the
just say
goals and
before
the
you
sort of
continue, I'll just say one thing.
go for it.
For me, what's really
Uh-huh.
helpful is concision, which is not to imply that you're going on and on. But for
Mm-hmm.
me, if you can get it down to like less
I can be
words, that's
concise. I'm just trying to basically be very elaborate in my descriptions so
I
that I don't have
I
to
can
answer
tell, and that
clarifying questions which might come afterwards.
yeah, I can tell, and I don't even think that's a bad thing to do. I think some people have a preference for that. They would rather just have like a lot of information given to them so that they just get the most like
Yeah.
rich picture. I'm a little different. I prefer just the like just give me the high level thing, and that's really easy for me to understand. And then if I'm not clear about some aspect of it, I'll just ask.
Okay, so I'm telling you that, let's say hypothetically speaking, every debater you've debated on the NTT or what that specific NTT trait question you were talking about currently,
Hmm.
they gave the same retort that I've given. Would
Hmm.
you believe that given your task or your objective of the entity question or argument, whatever you want to call it, do you believe that that would be a dialectically effective script or dialogue to go on? Yes or no?
By dialectically effective, do we mean it would persuade the person I'm speaking to go vegan?
Both persuade the person, and either that or make the person have a position which is contradictory or absurd from your position or your perspective. Do you believe it to be effective with respects to one of those two options?
Sorry, that was a bit of a weird way to think about effective. Effective is sorry, it's either getting showing that it's contradictory,
I can
absurd,
type it out in the chat.
or getting them to
Yeah, I
change
can type
their
it.
point of view.
I'll type it just in the chat actually. Get in person to be persuaded. Or person has an absurd position from AY of or contradict.
So the
Yeah, so it's going to be one of
question,
these three things. Do you
so
believe that with respect to these three specific things, it would be the case that the NTT script is successful? If that's the task that you want to establish with that type of question or interrogation to the non-vegan.
and sorry, we're just talking about in the case where someone gives the response you give, basically.
Yep, yep, that's what I'm talking about.
I guess I'm not totally sure. I feel like there's sort of more conversation that could be had, and maybe we would get somewhere with it. Maybe they'd be persuaded, and maybe they wouldn't. So I guess I'd say I'm not really sure.
Okay, so I can just, I guess, extend my approach for to understand more about my responses to any sort of hypotheticals you give. And so that would perhaps change your position from you not being sure to, yeah, I'm sure that this would be successful, or I'm sure that, yeah, it kind of doesn't really work against that type of person, right? So if the person was to basically just every single time you give like a hypothetical, they still say, okay, I get the point for hypothetical, but there's still a distinguishing trait, and the evidence for that is the intuitions I have for that being the case, even though I can't name the trait. And this goes on in response to every single hypothetical or every single reduction you could possibly given that conversation. Do you believe that any of those three options would be satisfied by the NTT Dallas script or not?
I feel like there's one thing that's a little bit weird about what you just said, which is that I wouldn't be giving someone a reductio if I wasn't clear about what the trait is that they're naming.
Hold on a second. So, to be clear on this, right, I want to make sure that we're on the same page again.
Sure.
I'm pretty certain that at least one of the goals is, it doesn't have to be the only goal, but at least one of the primary goals is to basically convince the person over to the vegan side, correct? That's one of the goals at the very least.
Yeah, that's an outcome that I'm happy with, but just when we call it a goal, I just want to be clear that there's plenty of
Mm-hmm.
conversations where that doesn't occur, right? There's a lot of people who don't become motivated to go vegan when they hear NTT.
I don't want you to conflate goal with outcome, even though the conversational outcome is not the thing that I'm talking about. By goal, I'm just talking about a pre-established intention you had in mind before engaging or participating in a given conversation with a non-vegan. I'm asking you if that would be something which would be a goal, given that definition of what the goal is.
A goal as in an outcome that I would be glad to see occur, or that is among the things that I would intend to have
Yeah,
occur, like sort of like in a disjunct though, where
the first
it's
one, the former.
something that I would be happy to have occur.
Yes.
And then what's the question about a goal?
I'm asking you, would it be the case that your goal is to convince the person to become a vegan or get them over to the vegan side, which is why you started this whole entity movement in your community and so forth?
I don't like that phrasing because it implies that, well, maybe it doesn't imply this, but it could be someone might get the impression that I enter the conversation with, like, I guess I'm worried that that people might hear something like that and think that I am failing if with respect to one of my goals if the person doesn't go vegan. But there's sort of a big disjunctive set of goals in the conversation.
Just to be clear, I'm not making this out to be like some sort of like exclusive disjunction or like like this like an exclusive thing insofar as this has to be one of the goals or this is the only goal. I'm not making that claim. I'm just asking you, are these one of your listed goals? Because it appears to be the case
Yeah.
strongly
No.
that this is
If
one of your goals.
yes, yeah. So
Mm-hmm. What's
if
that?
the idea is that one of the goals, and goal is understood sort of disjunctively, like it's understood that often we're not going to achieve all the goals. In fact, some of the goals are, I think, incompatible with each other even. But if that's all understood, then yes, one of the goals, as in one of the outcomes that I would be happy to see occur, and that is among the things that I would intend disjunctively to occur in the conversation, then yeah, the one of my goals would be for them to go vegan.
Okay, and so do you have knowledge of all the other goals you have when you're running the script? And if so, could you, basically give me a description of all those other goals to test whether or not it would be successful in the face of my type of response to the NTT script?
I guess there's a handful of things. I don't know that I could give an exhaustive list, but I could name various things that I would like to have happen. Yeah. So one of them would be
Uh-huh.
that they go vegan. Another would be that their position is just contradictory or absurd from either my point of view or some relevant group of people's point of view. Um, Another is, I don't know, just kind of it results in me like reaffirming my own view makes sense or something. Like, yeah, I don't know. I'd probably need to think for a bit, but those are like a few things I'd be happy with.
Okay, so the last condition when you talk about results and you reaffirming your own view, could you clarify that one, please, and thank you? Just to be clear, I don't want to. It comes off as something really trivial, and I don't think you're the type of person who
Well,
means what I think you
I
mean.
think
But
I think it might be
just
this.
clarify.
I think it might be the same as the first one, but I guess sometimes you go into a conversation just to see if someone can say something that persuades you to change your point of view. And when that fails to happen, you're
Mhm.
like, oh, here's like another conversation that leads me to think I'm on the right track. Something kind of like that.
Okay, so would you say, just to see if I'm accurately representing your position again, would you say that one of the goals that you enter, or that, because I've seen your NTT debates, I've seen some of them which ended up being pretty toxic, at least from my point of view, and some of them which have been pretty civil. Would you say in those debates, in all of those debates, or at least in most of those debates, it is the case that the one of the goals at the very least is to be persuaded?
Sorry, that one of the goals is for me to be persuaded,
Yeah.
as in for me to just reaffirm like here's yet another case that shows me I'm on the right track.
Yeah, so remember when you were talking about sometimes you head into conversation to be persuaded that you're wrong about the given subject matter. I'm asking if that's one of your goals.
I think so. I think usually that's in there.
Okay. And so would you say this is a subsidiary goal or a primary goal? Which one is it?
I don't really know about that. I just kind of think about it like there's just a bunch of goals.
Okay, cool, got you. So just had to ask those questions just to understand a couple of things.
Yeah, sorry, just to
given
Avi,
that
to
specific
Avi,
goal.
just to Avi right there. I assume that he misspoke and he meant to say right, not wrong when he said that. Even though I still maybe those are still different, but I assume that I assume you meant to repeat the same thing that I repeated, which is a reaffirmation that I'm right, not a reaffirmation that I'm wrong.
Yeah, so yeah, of course, because you're saying, well, the way that like, so what I heard you say specifically, you saying that sometimes you get into conversations to be persuaded by the opponent.
Like, can I just say
So I'm not
what
sure
I
if,
mean is just like testing my own position. Like just what like
okay.
yeah, that's all I'm really talking about. Like one of the goals is kind of
Oh,
go
I
in
get
and
what you're
test my own
saying. I get
view.
what you're saying. So when you're talking about persuading, okay, so when you're talking about being persuaded by your opponent, you're talking about your opponent reinforces your position, not that they
Yeah, I'm
change your position.
yeah, I'm not talking about going into
Okay, cool.
like to
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah.
Okay, because I thought you were like saying, "Oh, I head into debates to be persuaded to be not bigot," because I'm like,
No, I
yeah,
mean
that's hilarious.
that
Yeah.
would be I mean, look, if I were to become persuaded of that, then I guess that would just be where I'm at and I'd be like, "Oh, I guess this is the right position." But I definitely am not entering these conversations like excited to find out about how I actually shouldn't be vegan or something like that. What's Avi saying? Avi, can you just well, actually, I don't know if you want another person to speak up, but he usually has good things to say. Goal is to see if you can be persuaded if you're
I
wrong.
think all of his clarification in the chat was sufficient. I don't want it to
Cool.
be like inflated conversation
That's
so far
okay.
as the participants are concerned.
I think what he's saying
I
is
just
right
wanted,
though.
yeah, of course. If not for that clarification, it would be like, yeah, cause like, really, what are you saying, dude? So okay, cool. So yes, lovely. So we're finally getting somewhere. Now, with respect to my response to your question, is it the case that your belief in being a vegan is more reinforced or not?
Um,
Or it's just the
I
same
guess I'm
level,
not
like
really
you just
sure.
have the same stochastic strength? Uh-huh.
I sort of feel like I'd have to kind of explore it more and get a better sense of how it works.
Okay,
Because
so
I
on
feel
the
like
last,
you could cut off any
go for it.
conversation like part way into the conversation and be like, you know, have you achieved your goals? Did any of these things happen? I'd be like, well, I mean, not yet.
Yeah, but
But
you'd agree that like there's like a slight disanalogy insofar as in that hypothetical you've just given, it is the case that the argument or the response is not fully communicated to the interlocutor, whereas I think in this conversation, my response is fully articulated and communicated to you, who's the opposing interlocutor here. So I think you have a fully fleshed out grasp of the sort of response I've given how you re-articulated my argument, and given your understanding that you've displayed this far. So I
I
wouldn't say that that's fully accurate insofar as the analogy is concerned that you've just given.
I
Yeah,
guess I'm
sorry.
not really sure about that because the kind of way that I feel is like I still feel like I want to understand more about what you're saying, and I don't really. I don't know. It feels like a conversation that's still in progress, so I wouldn't really sit here and make an assessment about well, I guess I could say like have my goals been met thus far. I would just say no. I don't really think so far. But I also sort of suspect
Okay.
that there's more of a conversation to have.
Okay, so what specific parts do you think is something which we have to touch upon, since you think there's more of a conversation to be had from your perspective? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I basically want to come to some kind of understanding of what the trait is. Um, yeah, I mean
But it's
that's
baked into my response that I don't understand what the trait is. So there would be no more conversation to be had if that's what you're talking about. If your goal moving forward is to understand what the trait is, insofar as you know the details of the trait, and my response stipulates that that's not epistemically accessible given our current knowledge, then it's not going to be the case that it is even true to even say that there's more of a conversation to be had given that standard,
well, yeah.
right?
So one thing I would like is to get an understanding of what the trait is. If that's not possible, I guess maybe becoming persuaded that there is some like inarticulable trait that isn't contradictory or absurd. I guess becoming convinced that that is in fact the case. I mean, that would be interesting to me also, because it's one thing to
Yeah, but
understand
yeah,
what
but
a.
it seems to be the case that.
Let me just
Sorry to
finish
cut
this
you off.
point.
It seems.
Let
Go
me
for it,
just
got
finish
you.
this one, yeah,
Hmm.
because it's one thing to understand what the reply is on some level. Like, okay, I understand you're saying that there's a trait that has such and such properties, but then it's another whether I think that's true or not. So I guess if understanding what the trait is isn't an option, then I guess something else I would want to do, which is like, I guess further conversation would be understanding why I should believe that there's an inarticulable trait like that.
Oh yeah, I mean that specifically would just be in verge of the moral intuitions we have that there's nothing wrong with the actual action of eating animals.
Yeah, so that I don't find persuasive because I think that when we reflect, it's when we start reflecting on the intuitions. I think that that can, well, I guess I think that a lot of people will feel like there's nothing wrong with killing animals, but then when you spend some time talking about it, you get them to start thinking about cases, then that shifts around. So I guess
I
someone
think for
not.
some people that's true, but I think for a lot of people they don't give a shit to be honest. They're like, oh really? I don't
Yes,
really
I,
care,
I
dude. Chicken
agree.
is like good as shit, dude.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's certainly a lot of people who just don't care.
Yeah, but
But
I don't.
that's
But just to be clear on one thing, because you gave a response and you're specifically indexing it to you being persuaded, I'd care more about whether or not I've given evidence for my position, and it's irrelevant from my perspective, not to be like a sort of obnoxious scumbag. It's irrelevant from my perspective whether or not the person with whom I'm talking to is persuaded by the evidence. So long as I've given evidence which demonstrates my position being correct and their position being incorrect, that's all I care about in the given debate. That's it. Nothing else.
you're just asking me if I think that you're justified in thinking that there is a trait with those properties or not.
And not just justified, but more justified believing that there are those properties than to believe the negation towards that proposition.
I think so. I mean, I think if you have really strong intuitions one way or another, or you have, I mean, intuitions is kind of a weird way to put it, but like, I could understand.
Intuitions is the perfect word actually, and that's what I'm pretty sure on the same page in that too.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm happy to use that term because I don't really want to get in a whole thing about intuitions, but I could understand though if someone. So I'll just flag that I have some issues with intuitions, but I'm okay. Just like we don't really need to get into that. I think that I
Okay, so one more
would.
thing is simply sorry, continue. Go for it.
Yeah, but I think I could agree that from the point of view of you or just some hypothetical person, they could be starting from a position where I don't know, they have intuitions that point in a particular direction, or they have other stuff that points in a particular direction, and that
Mm-hmm.
justifies their belief that some given thing, killing animals or any given thing, isn't morally problematic for them, and even further than that, upon reflection, they would not. They also would be maybe justified in thinking that even upon reflection, I wouldn't come to care about this. I don't think I disagree with any of that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I actually resonate with your response when you talked about post-reflective intuitions. I think post-reflective intuitions are more evidentially reliable than prima facie intuitions. But given this conversation and the response we're talking about here, there not being the post-reflective intuitions. I don't think so. Like from my perspective, like if you were to have like, let's say every single non-vegan were to share the same doxastic states as Apollo, right? It is the case that they would not have any post-reflective intuitions that are being arised subsequently after you give certain hypotheticals or give me certain sort of content to persuade me over to the vegan position. So given the current available intuitions, which be prima facie intuitions, first-hand intuitions, I think that's evidence for the position that it is the case that there is a trait, irrespective of it being inarticulable, as you like to call it.
Um, okay, I think I agree, but just let me think about it for a second. So the idea is just if ever it's just say everyone's just got a mind just like you, and they all have got a really strong intuition that it's fine to do stuff like put animals in gas chambers, like stab them to death, things like this.
Uh-huh.
That they would be justified in thinking that I guess they would be justified in thinking that doing that is okay and that nothing further is likely to shift them away from that position.
Oh, wait, hold on. I want to clarify one thing because you mentioned the gas chamber stuff. I think that there are certain means of killing. And by the way, this is like implied heavily by my response in the chat when I said, "Sorry, I got to go pray." Like I'm a Muslim, right? So I have restrictions on the types and the means by which you kill animals. So I think those types of means are disrespectful. They violate certain virtues and so forth. I don't resonate with those means of killing animals. The position I'm defending here is that it is okay to kill animals for the sake of eating those animals, confined to certain practices by which we exercise to kill that animal for the sake of consumption purposes. Right. So I'm not saying that any way in which you kill an animal is okay. Like if you like put in, I'm not saying that. So I don't want you to just like invoke that
Yeah,
and think I'm
that's
defending
okay.
that position.
So I understand you.
Okay.
I understand your pro. So you support like halal slaughter, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. So I don't know the exact details with halal, but I'll just take your word for it if you say gas chambers aren't halal. But I think still
Yeah.
stabbing in the throat and stuff is halal. Yeah.
It's a slice. So you slice their head off in an almost instantaneous fashion. That's what I'm saying. And I think
Yeah.
the action of eating animals is not something which is immoral. So that those are the two claims I'm primarily defending. So I don't want to basically change the scope to something which I'm not defending. So I just want
No,
to get
I
that
understand
clear.
that. That's fine. If I say yeah, I mean, I just assume that you were just supporting, generally speaking, the kind of things we do to animals, but you're supporting a subset of it, which is halal slaughter. So that's fine. I don't mind you clarifying that. When I say that's fine, I don't mean
Yeah.
that halal slaughter is fine. I think halal slaughter is fucking barbaric hellhole, but I definitely, which not to, um, well, it's kind of a hard line to tread because I'm respectful of people's faith in a sense. Like, I mean, I get that
Yeah.
you have your reasons for believing what you believe, and I don't think people are necessarily irrational, and we could have a whole conversation about that. But also, from my perspective, it's just like totally barbaric and insane. So, I'm trying to tread the
Understood.
line here. I don't know
Um,
exactly how to.
I also could defend the non-halal means of slaughtering, but that's something which I don't want to defend and I don't care to defend because number one, I don't hold a strong assertive position on that. And number two is I don't want to basically overly commit myself to burdens which I don't have to commit
Yeah,
myself
yeah,
to in this
that's
debate or
fair.
conflict.
But you're just saying.
Yeah.
But I understand though when you say I could defend it, you're basically saying your same reasoning could probably be extended into those kind of
Yes.
contexts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
hmm
yeah. So
And by the way, I don't want go for it.
excuse me. No, go ahead. It's fine.
I was just going to say that not to derail too much. Remember the point you're on is on the second goal, which is about whether or not there is a trait which distinguishes, one from the other, and if there's evidence for that. And I'm saying there is evidence. There'll be the intuitions, yada yada yada. There are not
So
being the post-reflective intuitions, because of the stipulations given my response, etc.
I'm not thinking clearly about the first goal, the second goal, this or that. But what I'm trying to answer is just what I was understanding you were asking is something like if everyone had a mind like you, would they be justified in thinking both that stabbing or slicing animals' heads off is fine, and that no further information is likely to persuade
Mhm.
them that that's not the case?
Yes, and by justified, all I mean, I'm not just saying justified in so far as, oh, there's some reason to believe this. I'm saying justified in so far as the preponderance of evidence favors that there exists such a trait, in contrast with the negation hypothesis.
I think so. I don't think I disagree with that. I mean, it could be like, I don't know you. It could be that
Mhm.
that there's some further thing that would make you reflect differently, but I mean, if you've fully seen what's happening and you look at that and you just
Mhm.
feel nothing,
Yeah,
or not enough to not want to do it or whatever. I don't want to straw man you by saying nothing if it's not literally nothing.
yeah, exactly. Don't pay me like some like psychopath or something like that. Yeah,
Well, it
please and thank you.
does it does strike me as pretty fucking psychopathic to be, if you want me to be honest about how I feel about it. Um, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, I don't think that I disagree that if someone has basically, they've seen what's happening, they've been exposed to the arguments, they're comfortable with
Mhm.
what's happening, that they're, well, basically just that they're justified in thinking there's probably some kind of morally relevant trait difference. Well, actually, wait. Do I think that? Well,
Mhm.
I'm not sure
I
if
want
I.
to address. You made a point about comfort. I think we can grant that we have. So, like, I look at videos of animals getting slaughtered, and I have some sort of discomfort towards those actions. But I don't think discomfort is a sufficient justification or condition for something being morally wrong. And there are plenty of examples. If I see someone vomit, right, I'm like, ugh, disgusting. But it's not something which is morally wrong, right? So there are a lot of things in the real world which is repulsive from our perspectives, which is still not something which is morally wrong. I can also grant it to be the case that I have some sort of empathy with what's going on and feel bad for them. You can feel bad for someone and not believe that the thing which happened to that person was a morally wrong action. So think of like natural events, for example. Let's say I was to be an atheist and I don't believe that there is an intentional cause behind all things which occurs in the universe. And so something like an earthquake, and a family died from earthquake, and there's a kid from that family who has lost his mom, his dad, and all. When I empathize with that, I'm like, God damn it, I feel bad for that kid, right? I'm not gonna say that on the basis of me feeling bad for that person, I suddenly come to the extrapolation that something morally wrong happened to that person because that was just a natural event. So discomfort and empathy towards a given activity is not sufficient in any way whatsoever to make a much larger assertion, which is simply that there's something morally wrong about the given action which is being assessed by both me and these respective moral agents, just to be clear on that part. Right.
Um. Okay. Well, so if the question is whether I think that that person is justified in thinking that there is some trait difference, um, I think so. I mean, I'm kind of skeptical that that's actually the case. I sort of wonder if you were to continue to reflect, and rather than sort of starting from appealing to your intuitions
Mm-hmm.
to try to actually sort of find the line, it could be that you do that and you actually have a quite a hard time, and that causes some kind of shift. So I guess it depends
Yeah.
exactly how we frame the question. So if
When
it's
you say
just about,
skeptical, when you say skeptical, I want to clarify this first and foremost. Are you saying that it is the case that you don't believe there's evidence or there's more evidence favoring my position, which puts you in a state of apoc or agnosticism? Or is it the case that you agree that there's evidence favoring my position over your position on the trait distinction topic? However, you still have faith in the possibility of me changing my position as we continue to investigate
sorry, I
my
have to say,
intuition and
like, I
so
just
forth.
I just need to be honest about like, when you talk, and I really don't mean this in a rude way. I genuinely
Hmm.
don't, but it might sound offensive. I hear the first bit and I think I know what you're asking, and then I tune out and you say a lot of stuff. And I guess
Okay, that's fine.
for everyone listening, they probably are hearing everything you're saying, and maybe that's building a picture. And I'm just not processing it. I need to go in like smaller chunks. So
Okay, that's fine.
yeah,
So just
if
I'm gonna rerun the question. That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. It's
yeah,
okay. I was just gonna say, oh, what was my? Oh yeah. So remember, you said you're skeptical of if there is a trade distinction. Remember that
yeah. So
part?
let me just say what I mean when I say that. So
Got you.
I am, I guess, not really convinced that if you were to reflect and try to draw the line, that you would find a line that you're satisfied with.
Okay, so that's more of like a psychological claim than an
Yes.
epistemological claim, right? So that's
Well,
yeah. So you're not talking about the epistemic status of the claim I'm making. You're talking about if you're convinced by the claim I'm making from your psychological perspective, correct?
I'm not totally sure what you're thinking of when you're talking about the epistemic status, but I'm making a claim
Evidence.
about
Just talking like if you're yeah, if you're not making the claim about if it is favored by the evidence when you're talking about skepticism, you're talking about
yeah, yeah,
whether or not
right,
you're
right, right.
convinced by
Because
the
I
yeah.
think so. Because I could understand from your point of view, you're going. Yeah, I could understand you based on having looked at some cases, based on your intuitions, whatever exactly you have available to you, that you could be justified from that point of view in thinking, okay, there's got to be some kind of trait there. That doesn't seem unreasonable to me. When I say I'm skeptical, I'm saying, yeah, I think something's psychological. I'm saying that I'm not sure if that would remain the case. If it would, I'm not sure
Uh-huh.
if you were to try to draw the line that you would be able to find a line that you're actually satisfied with.
Okay, so one thing before asking you a question, we both agree, real quickly, that given what's currently happening in this conversation, technically speaking, more evidence favors the position that there's a trait distinction given the fact that the intuitions favor that, correct? You'd agree on that specifically before we move on to something else.
We're speaking about from your point of view.
Yeah, what about the intuition stuff, etc., and that'd be evidence
Yeah,
for the claim, right?
I think so. I think that from your point of view, it could be reasonable to think that, or you could be more justified in thinking that there
Yeah.
is some trait than that there isn't. But I also sort of want to
Okay.
flag that justification comes very cheap. It's pretty easy for someone to be justified in believing something. So
It's pretty easy
it's
for
not.
someone to be justified in believing something in the loose sense, but not in my sense specifically, if we're talking about preponderance of justification. But I'm glad we agree that given the available data, what you want to say something? Sorry?
Well, I mean, I'm not sure if you're using it in a sense where justification doesn't come cheap. Like from my point of view, it's like, if you have a bunch of data at the outset that kind of favors one position, you're justified in thinking that position is more likely the case. I don't think that that's
That's not a
exactly.
sufficient condition for under my position because I think you can have a bunch of data which favors one position, but then there's data outside of that specific pool of data which favors the opposing position or undercuts that data which is being used to favor the initial position.
I'm just talking about
Okay?
how I mean justification.
Okay, gotcha, cool. I want to make clear on a couple of things. You're convinced in the Big Bang Theory, correct? Like you believe in that, right?
I don't know much about cosmology. I'm under the impression that's the model that people who study these kind of
Mm-hmm.
things favor. So I suspect that's the case, but I don't know much about it.
Okay. What about Newton's universal law of gravitation? Is
Yeah,
that
it's going to
something
be
you're
the same with all
convinced
the
is
things
true?
that are. I'll say the same thing about all the like major scientific theories. I don't know about them, but I suspect that they're. I think they're probably the more
But are you
justified
convinced
position or
by them
something.
at the very least? Would you say you're convinced by them?
As in, I think they're more likely the case than not.
Just what you meant by convinced when you were saying that you're not convinced that there is a trade distinction in the ethical discourse you're having.
Um, yeah, I think so.
Okay, so what distinguishes those cases from the case of the intuition's favor and there being a trade distinction,
I'm
evidentially speaking, which makes it so that you're convinced in that case, but not in this case, right?
I'm not sure. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. But I also have to admit that I'm just kind of like getting sort of bored. Like what are we really trying to get at? Because it just feels like it's kind of going nowhere. Like what are I like? So I
Well, I'm
grant.
trying to
Okay,
basically just go down because remember my claim was specifically which you're doubting, or we had some sort of
yeah.
nuanced and slight
Well,
disagreement
can I just
upon,
say
which
where
is
I'm
about
at?
the
I'll just let me say where I'm
go
at.
for it.
So what I
Mm-hmm.
think is that someone could be justified in thinking that they don't care about something and that nothing would lead them to care about something, or that there's likely to be some trait that differentiates some cases. That's all fine. That makes sense. I'm also a bit
Mm-hmm.
skeptical that um, if you were to try to draw the line, that you would find a line that satisfies you. Um, yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, I also am
Yeah.
doubtful that there would be a line that would satisfy me. These are things that I think. Yeah.
So the three goals you've listed, I think under these three goals, I don't think the entities in any way successful because remember I said in the chat and we were talking about this. It said I verbatim said I think the entity fails. The three goals is the person goes vegan. I think if they have the same sort of states as me specifically, the same justification to which you're kind of in agreement with, that first goal is unsuccessful. The second goal, which is to talk about the idea of there being a trade distinction or whatever. I think this. Let me check the second goal just to be clear. The second goal is for the person to have an absurd position or a contradictory position. That's just something which is not actually going to be successful either because of the fact that I've laid out that you could not in principle determine the absurdity or the contradictory nature of the response because the
Dude, I
response kind
gotta
of bakes
say,
in something.
you're just kind of losing me. Like we might just have
What's
very
up?
different ways of talking, but I keep getting lost when you're talking, and it's just a little hard for me. It could honestly, it might just be that I'm getting tired. But
Okay,
where
got you.
I'm at
Well,
overall is
I
like
can summarize, but I can summarize even more. It's
if
just that the reason as to why I'm
it's
talking like this with you specifically is because you're the type of person who asks a lot of clarifying questions. And so I'm trying to basically avoid having to answer future clarifying questions
I
by
guess
giving a
where I'm at is just I don't know what the fuck we're getting at, and I don't feel like my view has changed on anything. So I don't know. Is there something that you think that uh yeah, like I guess I would just say sort of like what's like the point? Like is there some sort of overall point
well,
or
the point is
something
just
or
to basically point out that the point is just to basically point out that given all the goals you mentioned of the entity, the claim that the entity fails is true. That's it.
okay, so the
Yeah.
claim that NTT fails is true. I guess I
That's
don't
short enough for the track. Yeah, I think you can definitely understand that sentence.
yeah, so I'm and now I'm just thinking about that. So I mean, I guess prima facie I'm not seeing how I failed, but I'm just trying to think through the different
Well, that's
sort
the
of
reason as to why I was going down all the goals specifically, and I explained why, given all the goals that you've mentioned, it would fail. Like that's it.
mm,
So my
well,
claim was
yeah,
correct
it's just
regarding that.
it's
I was
yeah,
defending that
you
position.
just got to give me time to think. So I'm trying to think, do I think that NTT fails? Prima facie, no, I don't think that. And I guess I'm sort of looking at this conversation and I'm going, what kind of goals do I have
I
in
think we can
this?
end things off. I
Can
think
I?
I
Sorry,
basically
I'm getting a little frustrated with you cutting me off. You got to let me just think for a minute if that's okay. Is that okay?
got you.
Yeah. So okay. Sorry. Let me just start again. So I'm trying to think about NTT. So the claim is NTT fails. Prima facie, not really convinced that's the case. Um, so I'm kind of looking at like what are my goals in this conversation, and have I failed with respect to any goal that I well or all. um, so let me just sort of think about that. Um, I guess the way that I honestly feel is just that the view is kind of I don't know. It's kind of I want to say a bit unclear, but I understand you can clarify it at some level, kind of like we were talking about with the circles and stuff. I guess I just overall look at it and I don't know. I'm not exactly even sure what to say. I just don't I don't know. I guess my patience is just kind of running low.
Well, I would say that my patience has been tested from the very beginning because even in the chat, I was even saying this in another server, even asking so many questions, but I was still like, Okay, I'm gonna be patient. Okay, cool. He's asking so many questions instead of. I think I should be the one complaining about the tedious nature of this conversation. Me having to basically kind of force certain things for your position or your claims or trying to understand it. It's like, yeah, but I don't want to get into like a whole
Sorry, I just even
optical
right
jerk
now
off
I
session.
feel like I'm just not listening.
Yeah,
Like I feel like I'm just trying to think a bit. Um
that's fine. I think we can just wrap the conversation up. I think my point has already been proven. I think we can just check back the recording since you're having some sort of tracking issues when we were having this debate, or
Wait,
when we are
well,
having
one
this debate
second.
at this very
We don't
moment.
need to take pot shots tracking issues. I could say you're having explaining clearly issues or explaining concisely issues. I don't do that. I just understand that we might be speaking differently. So,
Well, I think that
let's
you're kind of taking implicit shots,
okay,
but I don't know.
it's not helpful.
Um,
It's not helpful. No, I'm not taking pot shots at you. I'm trying to be really fair to you. It's just it's not you cut in so quickly sometimes that it's like, "Oh, I'm just trying to think." So, yeah, I guess it's not clear to me that there's been failure with respect to what I care about. Um, I don't know. Like, I guess what I feel is
that's fine.
that. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm saying that's fine. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, I guess what I feel is. Well, yeah, I just need to think for a minute. So you should just let me think for a minute.
Are you still here?
Yeah, I just need to think for a minute.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That's
Just let
fine.
me
That's fine.
think.
I'll
Yeah.
just one mute. Just let me know when you're done thinking.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
I'm
Just
just gonna
you can
go.
just type or do something or just chill for a minute. You just gotta let me just think a bit. Yeah. So I guess one thing is that one interest I have is in seeing if there's any reason to shift my own position. And I don't
Mhm.
really think I've seen that. And I guess another thing is just to see a trait given or set of traits that actually doesn't fall into one of those two categories. And I also haven't seen that. So I guess those are some things that are goals I have that, as far as I can tell, haven't. There's not been failure with respect to them. We'd probably have to talk longer.
Okay, so the first goal that you mentioned about you not seeing any reason to be dissuaded by your position, if that's correct, that's something which you've neglected originally when you said that it is the case that you're not heading into conversations like these for the purpose of changing your position or seeing what the
Sorry,
non-vegan is
I
actually saying.
already. I think I lost track of what you're saying. Say it. Just say again.
That's fine. I'm saying that given what you've said originally, I don't think that that would be one of your goals because you said that you're not heading
Okay,
into these debates.
to stop doing that though. I really feel like it's unfair. I feel like you're like it's okay if you want to note the things that have
Uh-huh.
been said so far and refer back to them, but like you know if like it's just you gotta have the like it's like the human dimension, you know, like if I sit there and I like rattle off a
Uh-huh.
few things that I care about, you don't want to later on be like, well, these are the exact things that you've said and I've not seen these specific things, blah blah blah, blah, that this that. It's like I just don't like that. I just feel like why don't we just like talk about what I actually care about and just so let's just do that. And what I'm just saying some things I care about right now. Like for instance, one thing with NTT is I'd like to see if someone could actually give a trait or set of traits that doesn't fall into one of those two categories. And I guess one goal I have would be just sort of testing my own position, right? To see if someone ever successfully does that. Because if they were to do that, that would shift my position. And so far, it seems to me that goal is being met. I think I listed another, but I forgot it. But that's sort of one right there, though.
Okay, so as far as I can understand it, that Troid goal regarding whether it can basically change your position or whatever, I think that's the only goal which would be met. But I was specifically just indexing the success rates of the arguments or so forth based off the original three goals that you've mentioned, which you've said is not exhaustive. But as far as you could have told, or as far as you could have, told at the time period in the conversation, those were the goals that
Well,
you were
two
thinking
two
about at that
things.
time. Yes,
Two things.
go for it.
One is that I'm not watching my language super carefully, so I have to check if what I just said is technically one of those.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter all that much because what really matters is just what I actually think and care about, not what I articulate while listing off like some of the goals or something like this. And then so wait, that was one point. And then the other is I think it is one of those, isn't it? Didn't I mention something about testing my position? Isn't what I'm talking about a version of
Yeah,
testing my
that
position?
one would be met.
You roboted
That one
there?
would be met by, yeah, I'm saying that goal would be something which the entity would succeed in, given the scripts that I'm running, because it is specifically stipulating that, hey, presenting me a trait which can just mentally challenge my perspective on this matter. And of course, given the stipulation of my response, I'm not presenting a specific trait,
Right. So you're
right?
saying
I'm just
it
proving that there
would
is a trait.
so you're saying it would be thus far successful with respect to that goal.
To that goal, but I think
Yeah.
all the other goals it failed.
What were the other ones? The other ones were
Making the
remind me.
person go
Let's just go
vegan
one by one. Making the
or
person making the
yeah,
person
sure.
go vegan. Yes, that has not occurred.
Yeah, that's one.
So far, no success on that goal. What's the other ones that we talked about?
Making the person give a response or trait which is contradictory or absurd. That has
Yeah,
not
so that
succeeded
isn't that
altogether.
hasn't occurred yet. I agree with that.
The third one is reinforcing your position insofar as you being a vegan, so it convinces you further to adopt your position. That's the third
Yeah,
goal.
and let's flag that kind of part of how that happens is not managing to give any trait that fails to fall into one of those two categories. That's part of what reinforces my position.
Part of what it is, but it's not necessarily sufficient because in this conversation, when I ask you, okay, do you think it is the case that you're more convinced into your position based on my response? You said you're not sure and you don't think so, and you have to have a further conversation. And when you had a further conversation, we're back where it started from, where you said you're bored of the conversation. So I
Okay,
don't think
I'm
with
not
respect to my
I'm
response, you'd be further
for
reinforcing your
some reason
position.
okay, I'm not following all of how you're tracing through the conversation. Keep in mind also like there's one way to approach things in debate, which is to set up like a really linear conversation and trace through it all and use arguments and stuff. And that's
Yeah.
like not how I'm approaching this conversation. I'm approaching this conversation a lot more like just kind of hearing you out. I understand there's some level of disagreement and we're just kind of talking it through. So I'm not doing that kind of careful tracking here. So when you do the careful tracking, I'm like, okay, well, I haven't been doing that, so I'm not totally sure if everything there is a correct recapitulation or not. But
You're
yeah,
still recording, right?
yeah, I've been recording.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, um, yeah. So there is the goal of sort of seeing if anyone can give a position that to me or people with cognition like me or I don't know, which might I suspect in this at least this aspect of my cognition is probably like a lot of people in the population. So yeah, there's this one goal that's like with respect to people like that, giving an answer to NTT, as in like actually laying out a trait or set of traits that doesn't fall into one of those two categories. So I guess we're agreeing that some goals have thus far not been met, some goals have thus far been met. Yeah, that sounds right. Do we disagree about any of that?
No, we don't. I want to
Okay.
clarify for the audience also because I see a couple of strawmans in the chat. The that response, because me and A, we basically, this is why I specified the relevancy criteria. So it has to be relevant. Now, of course, I'm not saying to ask yourself, oh, well, if I just respond to what's the trip by saying poopy pants or something like that, that succeeds, and that's no. It has to be relevant to the question. It has to progress the dialectic, and it also have to offer some sort of it also has to furnish some moral justification for the non-vegan. So it has to be relevant, and it can't be between AY and someone with Down syndrome. It's between two normal moral agents. So let's not try to, straw man the scope of the conversation to make the points and make it more trivial than it actually is. It's actually far more substantive than the interpretations there. Just making that clear. Which is why I specified the relevancy criteria. And I even asked you, AY, do you want me to define that terminology? Right. And you
No,
said, no, that's not necessary.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
not too worried about
Just want to
the
clarify.
word relevant. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, I don't know really. I guess I would just emphasize one thing, which is that I think that a big part of NTT is really like putting in the effort to try to find the dividing line. And I think that well, I mean, obviously it doesn't have to be down to the molecule or something, but trying to find roughly what the difference actually is. And that exercise, and I
Mhm.
think so far in my experience, 100% failure rate with respect to finding that line. I think that that's the kind of thing that leads me to think that I'm on the right track and that sort of leads other people in a similar direction. And I suspect also, I'm not sure about you, I just don't know you well enough. But I think a
Mhm.
lot of people who might initially have the kind of justification you're talking about, like, yeah, I mean, I look at animals, I feels fine what we're doing to them. Their intuitions go in that direction. I think a lot of those people would, in fact, start shifting in how they think were they to try to start tracing that line. So those are just kind of things I want to flag because they sort of speak to the utility of NTT.
Okay, cool. I understand that. And I think that it's a bit unfair to kind of like stipulate, and which I did, and we both kind of like went under this stipulation. But I think it is unfair to stipulate that the people who you're communicating with would have the same psychological states and epistemic approach that I have. But I think I have a very niche approach to these conversations, unlike the normal person. And I think with respects to that stipulation, I don't think it would have anywhere near the same level of utility that you initially thought it out to have
Yes,
originally, right?
it could be. So again, I just don't know you well, but it could very well be that you're the kind of person who you try to reflect on the line, and then after a while, you just sort of find the line, and you're like, yeah, it's like having this set of properties, and I'm just fine with the consequence of that. That could very well be the kind of person that you are. So yeah, I'm not. I don't know exactly what I was replying to there, but either way, I don't think we're really disagreeing about much. I think that we
Mm-hmm.
agree that there's not been success with respect to some goals thus far. There has been thus far success with respect to some other goals, and yeah, there's
Well, with one goal specifically, with one goal.
yeah, of those that we've talked through, one of them, but again, I'm not like I
Yeah.
haven't drawn out an exhaustive list here. You know, any time that someone has a list of things, unless they have their list at the ready, if you tell them to list, like if you ask me, list off all the reasons why Haskell's your favorite programming language or something, like I'll list a few things that come to mind, but I'm not expecting that I'll be able to like generate the exhaustive list or something. But yeah, it sounds like with respect to some goals, there's thus far not been success. With respect to another goal, there has thus far been success. And I guess overall, the way I feel is pretty much just the same. I don't think that people have a good
Mm-hmm.
reply, by which I mean laying out the traits, to NTT. And I think when they do try, if they try to meet that challenge, you can just not try to meet that challenge. That's something you could do. But I think when they do try,
Mm-hmm.
they end up falling into one of those two categories. Yeah.
So
Okay, so just a couple of things. My perspective on this is simply that I believe that as it relates to what is being talked about, I think that when I say it fails, right, I think that, of course, it's possible that there's some future goals or something which you have not thought about on which it succeeds on. But I believe there's a net
Or
negative
not
utility from the
necessarily
actual.
future. It could also just be goals that didn't come to my mind at the time, which I have already thought
Yes,
of. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
of course, yeah. It's like something which you have subconscious access to, yeah. But I'm
Or which
telling
I
you
have
that, like,
conscious access to, but just did not come to my mind at the time. Like anytime you ask someone,
yeah.
list 10 movies, it's like, you have some that come to your mind and you have some that don't come to your mind. You probably have to sit around for a while to, yeah. Sorry, go ahead though.
hmm
Yeah.
I was just going to say that I think with respect to that standard, I believe that there is a net negative, insofar as it's there on most of the goals at the very least it fails on. But I don't want to
Wait,
focus on
but
that
but
part.
well, wait.
Um,
That's important to me though, because that gives an impression of overall failure. But I think even in the most successful NTT conversations, you might get failure with respect to most goals. Like in any conversation where you show absurdity, you're not going to get the contradiction goal, right?
of course, but I think that
And
there's an optical look or there's an optical consequence behind that insofar as it makes the
but
opponent look
just
optically
one
bad.
second, one second. Just the point that I'm
Mm-hmm.
making is that the way you want to analyze this isn't by going look at the quantity of goals achieved and that's some kind of indication of the success level, because some of the goals are like mutually exclusive, and it
Mm-hmm.
might be that I'm fully satisfied achieving a single goal, right? So we
Yeah, of
wouldn't,
course.
yeah.
Yeah, you have to look at the qualitative aspect and the optical aspects. I think that on those aspects also, that would still be satisfied because it is not the case that the response leads to something contradictory or something absurd or anything like that, right? So,
Yeah, it's
from
this,
an optical
but I also
perspective,
want to say something to that though, which is that
what's up?
you'll get that same consequence if you just have a conversation with someone who just doesn't really lay, like, I mean, from my point of view, it's just
But
not really meeting the
well, I think
challenge.
I know where you're going to get with this, but I
Yeah.
know where you're going to get with this, and that's why I mentioned prior to this debate or conversation that it's a non-trivial, it's a relevant response. It's not going to be something trivial. It's not like, and it's going to be between moral agents, like people who are like not who don't have Down syndrome or something. So it's between moral agents, and the response is relevant, and nonetheless, it's not contradictory. It's not absurd, and the person is not persuaded into
But I'm
becoming a
trying to say
vegan,
that you're not
nor
get
does it reinforce
I'm
conviction.
trying to say something
What's
about
that?
that though, which is I don't think you're
Okay,
getting as
go.
much as you might think you're getting there, because someone can easily get that by just not laying out an answer to the actual question, right? Like someone can enter a conversation and they can say, my trade is like Farglegark, and I'm like, oh well, and I'm not saying yours is gibberish, but this is just an example.
Okay.
I might be like, oh, what's Farglegark, and say we just go through the whole thing. They never clarify what they mean. It's like, have we shown contradiction? No. Have we shown absurdity? No. But that's not really an accomplishment. That's like a super easy thing to achieve by just not actually
Wait,
addressing the
it would be
challenge.
somewhat absurd, right? Go remember the absurd. Wait, hold on. Remember the conditions, because remember we were talking about the absurdity slash contradictory stuff. That is under the condition that you understand the trait. If you don't understand the trait, that's going to be something else, which just means that this perhaps gibberish from your perspective, which would it be confronting or rather interfacing with the point I'm making in this conversation, really, because
When
we have
I
not even established if you even understand or don't understand the response, right?
Okay, I'm not
Remember?
totally, I'm not sure what part of what I said that's contesting or something like that.
Okay, I'll just repeat it if you want me to after we're done
I don't,
talking. Yeah.
yeah, I don't think so. I think I'm just saying that it comes cheap to not say something contradictory or absurd. That's easy to achieve by just not laying out a position. That's and by a position I
Yeah,
mean
but
like
just to be clear, that's not what my response is like. Just making that clear. I don't want you to paint this picture that it's my response is of that same level, whereas it's just not just it's just a trivial non-point. It's responding to it. We both agree it's relevant, but you agree there's no trait which you can
well,
wrap your head
to be
around
clear,
or
with
put a
relevance,
grip
I've
on.
just said that I'm not really quibbling over relevance. I don't know exactly how you're thinking about that, but I'm happy to say it's relevant in some sense. I'm just pointing out
Okay.
it's not really a victory to not like I'm just like you get what I'm saying, right? It's easy to just
Mm-hmm.
say something, whatever it is, that doesn't actually provide a trait, and then you're not going to be saying a trait that's absurd or that's contradictory. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
because you've not said a trait at all, right? So I'm just pointing out that comes cheap by not saying a
Mhm.
trait, and is not something that I've ever like contested or anything like that, or really an
Yeah,
accomplishment.
but it comes cheap. But at the same time, I think that what does not come cheap is like the further justification as to why there is a trait. So justifying or proving that there is a trait which distinguishes those two things is a separate conversation from just not giving the trait, which anyone can actually do. So it's not, again, it's not a trivial response. And I also
I didn't say
specified
it's I
the
didn't say it's
on.
trivial. I don't know exactly what you mean that, but I'm
I'm
just
not saying you're saying this. I'm just clarifying, just for anyone who's listening, and for you, if you believe that to be the case. Not that I'm saying that you're making that
no, like
proposition.
no,
Um,
I'm just saying
mhm,
I don't want someone to sit there and go like, haha, I've not said anything contradictory or absurd, and you thought I would
mhm.
probably, and you're wrong. And it's like, well, not really, because if you asked me from the start, like,
Wait,
hey,
wait, that's kind
if
of like a straw man. Wait, hold on. That's kind of like a straw man. Because remember, we're indexing the contradictory slash absurdity goal to whether or not you understand it. And the example you've given, you don't understand it because you said the person tries to clarify it. I
when I
just pinged the
say
message, by the way.
understand, I think that by understand, I'm talking about I actually know what the trait is.
So, real quickly, because before you were saying something else, you were giving the square circle example, and then you were talking about
When you
physical representation
I don't
being
like when
what
you do
you're.
that. Like you can see why that's a bit like frustrating when you go in that direction, right? You're like, well, when before you said this, it's like, look, I've been sort of like a bit intentionally non-committal on some of those notions, right? So I don't think it does
Okay.
you much good to like try to needle that really. Like what
Okay, I'm
I'm
just making it clear like what your position here is because I think that like if you're making some given claim prior and then you're making a claim which is a bit different, then it kind of like causes confusion from
I
my
don't
end, and you have
think
to understand where I'm
I
coming
don't
from.
yeah, no, that's fair. I can understand you wanting to clarify where you're coming
Okay.
from, and I'm not again, so I'm not suggesting that you're being unreasonable. I genuinely don't think that you've been unreasonable or unfair. The only slight issue I have is you
Mm-hmm.
can go on a bit, which is just a personal preference. You can be a bit nippy, and sometimes it feels a bit gotcha-y. But these are like pretty minor. For like, I would say like and they might just be my impression. Also, if I were overall to characterize this, I would say that you've been very fair in this conversation. So
Okay, and I really
that's
appreciate it. And likewise, I think you've been pretty
sure.
fair also.
Well, thank you.
Because usually sometimes when I actually thought for some reason that this would have perhaps been some sort of like aggressive conversation because I've seen some debates where it's like, bro, you be going crazy, man. But and I've had my moments when I debate other people too, but
Well,
I'm
it
glad it did
depends.
not go that route.
I've
What's
also
up?
had different philosophies at different times. Like there's been times where I've had the view that you should just have whatever emotions you have just like totally unconstrained. So that's like one view I've had. That's a kind of funny view actually. Or, you know, I've had other I don't know. Anyway, whatever. This isn't the point. But okay.
Yeah.
So when I talk about understanding, again, I think I've been kind of non-committal about exactly what I mean by that. I don't think I committed to a particular notion of what exactly it means. But what I'm certainly noticing now is that part of what I mean by understanding is that I actually know what the trait is. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not yeah, right. So yeah, and I guess that's what am I trying to say? Knowing what the trait is. I just give me a second to think.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think it's easy to just to not end up saying anything contradictory or absurd by just not saying what the trait is. That's I don't know if I'm using every term there exactly identically to how I've been using it before, but I just think that it's easy to not do
Mm-hmm.
that if you don't say what the trait is. I think that it's kind of like the whole point is that where the contradiction or absurdity comes out is when people try to draw the line. So
Okay, gotcha.
I'm just saying I think that comes kind of cheap. That's not to say that your strategy is unfair or anything like that, or that it's a cheap strategy. It's just to say that you wouldn't, because I got a bit of an impression you were doing this. You wouldn't want to feel too victorious about that because it is an easy thing to do and something that I've never contested at all that people are able to do.
Uh, with
And
respects to what? Sorry, I kind of zoned out for a moment.
that's
You
okay.
went on for a bit.
I've been zoning out a lot also, so I actually feel
Yeah.
a bit better to hear you zone out for once, because I feel a little bad when the other person seems to be paying careful attention and I'm like, oh, my mind. No, I was just saying I think it's easy to just not provide a trait and therefore not say, if you don't give a trait, then there's no reductio we're going to tease out based on that trait, and there's no contradiction we're going to tease out based on that trait, because there isn't a trait that's been provided. So I'm just saying that
Yeah,
comes
I think
cheap when
that's
you.
an oversimplification of my response because it's not just to say, "Hey, I did not provide the
Uh,
trade, so
no, I didn't
haha,
say it's your whole
yeah."
response
It's
though.
too smart.
It's. I
Yeah.
wouldn't call it an oversimplification. I wouldn't even call it characterizing your whole response. It's just there is part of your
Okay, gotcha.
response, which is there's part
Yeah,
of
of
your
course.
response which is to not provide the trait. And I'm just saying, for any view that just doesn't provide the trait, any kind of strategy that does that, you're not going to get me saying that it's contradictory or absurd. Yeah, so I'm just saying that is the thing that
hmm
comes cheap. So I mean, you
Okay.
wouldn't want to
Yeah,
take too
that
much
that
pride in
subsection,
that.
that small section of my entire response comes cheap, but not the entire response. And the entire response is expensive.
Okay, well, yeah. So and then the so I'm just talking about
Oh, the
that
joke,
that
but I mean, like, I mean, it was just continue, just a play on
yeah.
words.
No, it's
Um,
okay. I got you. So I was just talking about that part. And then the other thing I wanted to ask is, like, I'd be curious.
mhm,
So I mean, I think we've been through this part of the conversation. I think we actually agree so far, because we agreed contradiction not shown, absurdity not shown, also challenge not really met. Like, we don't know what the trait actually is. So I guess what I want to ask is, like, why don't you take a shot at trying to actually draw the line, and let's sort of see what happens when you do try to find what the trait is.
well, I think of well, I've never really taken any sort of like you could say I've never tried to draw a line that much, or either maybe I have. I'm not really sure.
Well, I've paused
But
to
what
think,
my
so I'll let you pause to think. So, and I understand that
mhm,
if it's not something you've thought about, then obviously whatever you say is tentative, and if it ends up landing somewhere kind of wild, then you can be to
mhm,
some extent forgiven, because it's sort of like spitballing and
mhm.
not your main approach to the conversation. But that said, in
Well,
good
well,
faith,
then
I
we'd be
think.
having kind of like a different conversation at that point because then now it's going to be like, okay, we're not talking about the same
Yes.
response I had in mind when I
No,
was
no,
saying
no.
that my
I to
response
be
worked.
clear, I acknowledge that. So that's why I sort of started
Okay.
by summing up where we landed on the first conversation, which I think we agreed about
Okay.
where we landed, and then I'm just moving to another conversation, if you'll humor me, which is, I'd just
Okay.
be curious how you do try to answer it.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So it's not, and just to clarify, it's not something I put that much thoughts into.
Yes, and
I'm also,
I
even
even
though I
tried
keep.
to, just to be clear, I even tried
Mhm.
to help you hedge a little bit there, because I understand if you're put on the spot to answer or think about a fresh thing, you probably won't generate the best thing. So everyone can kind of
Yeah.
remember that for whatever you end up saying. Yeah,
Okay, cool. And just to be clear on a couple of things, like
sure.
even though I come off as a guy who's like, yeah, like pedantic in some sense, and I think deeply into stuff, I'm also, I would say I'm pretty intelligent, but I'm also a lazy thinker. So sometimes when it comes to like those challenges, if like there's a pretty easy way to just go through this shit and like just whatever, I'm not gonna like going to like exercise my brain to be like, okay, let's actually challenge this because here's something else which works against this sort of like
Yeah.
dialogue shit.
Well, let me say something to that
Yeah.
actually, because I think that, so I can understand that. I can definitely understand if you're approaching it from a level of, like, how do I just get something to, like, you're trying to just, I don't even know what the word is, like, how do I defeat this or something like that. Maybe you're just going to go for
With
whatever the
as
lowest.
minimal brain power as possible.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then there's a different kind of goal, which is like, let me give this the fairest shake and try to meet it on its own terms and see where I end up. And that could, I want to say that that's actually worth doing, because that's a legitimately interesting psychological exercise that seems to shift a lot of people around. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'd be curious to see you give that, excuse me, a shot.
And the thing is, I'm willing to engage on this, or rather, I would definitely be willing to engage on this if we had not went over our on all of that. What should I even call it? We've went into so much different like linguistic baggage of different words and all of that stuff, and then now I'm at this like state where my brain is kind of like getting tired and stuff. So now I have to like actually think about this in this tired state after we went on for like over an hour or something. And I think
Yeah, it's been an hour and 40 minutes. And I'm also
that's
tired.
crazy.
I say let's maybe if you're down, I'd say let's just call it at 11.
We can have
That's
like a part two conversation or something if that's fine.
yeah, but also I find often they don't happen, and I was gonna get off at 11, which is in like 13 minutes. So I'm thinking if you're down,
hmm
let's just try
I
for
can be
the.
down tomorrow. I'm free the entirety of tomorrow. Just ping me whenever you're ready, dude. I'm down. I don't duck fades, dude. I debate like literally any person.
Well, it's
I'm
not
that type of guy.
exactly a debate. It's just sort of like a challenge. But sorry, just to be clear,
Oh
are
yeah,
you just
yeah.
saying that you're like unwilling right now to actually try? Because I suspect the chat
Yeah,
would
I'm
be
unwilling right
interested.
now, considering the fact that we've went on for like nearly 2 hours, and they were
Okay.
planning to have like two separate conversations in a row, which is why even in the chat when you're talking about trying to establish whether or not you have this traditional position in moral subjectivism, and then you try to challenge me with the whole prove if you actually have this definition or whatever. I was like, I don't want to focus on that, even though I can prove that, because I don't want to have two conversations. I just want to focus on one thing, and that's it. You
That's
feel me?
okay. I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to force you into a conversation that you don't want to have.
Yeah.
I view it as a pretty tightly connected conversation, and I guess I'm just sort of curious how you spitball it. But if you're not willing, you're not willing. So
Yeah. Gotcha. I think it was a pretty good conversation, actually. Pretty good conversation. I hope your impressions on me was actually not something like, oh, this guy's a bad faith debater or is like a dumbass debater. That would be something which is, of course, a bit
no,
offensive, of course.
no,
So
I've
I
I've
hope the initial impressions are pretty good.
I've told you my impression, which is there are some aspects that are a little bit negative. It's mostly positive. I think for the most part you've been very fair. But there's a few little negative parts which are just I think you can be a bit nippy. I think that
hmm
sometimes you explain at length and I just lose track. So that one's more just something I personally struggle
I
with.
think our styles are very different, and it doesn't favor or complement each other that well. So for one, I don't really. So to be fair, I know you most definitely don't really like my style, and perhaps it's the same thing, vice versa. Because with your style, you're very pedantic, and you go on these semant. This is for one the most pedantic debate I've had in like forever. I've debated Synth, I've debated Arianas, I've debated all of these people, and this debate or conversation, whatever you want to call it, it's very, very pedantic, a lot of semantic stuff, and okay, let's go on to this condition, that condition, does this work? Let's tick this off. It's like very, very slow paced and pedantic. If you watch most of my debates, it's very fast paced, aggressive. It's very okay, prove that. It's very confrontational. It's very contentious. There are a lot more contentious points than with this specific debate or dialectic, whereas the points are far less contentious, far more modest and humble, and it's kind of like I'm trying to spot and I'm trying to force out the contentious nature of the points you're making, which I think I kind of done on some occasions, which you can disagree on, personally. No.
Well, I don't know. Like force out the contentious nature. It's I guess what is that like? That's like finding disagreement.
Yeah, yeah. I just don't think because I had it. Of course, I approached it with the intention of debating you, of course, right? Debating you on
Yeah.
something which
Well,
we actually disagree on. So it's kind of like go for it, finish.
Well, yeah. So I don't think that. Wait. So what was the original disagreement? The original disagreement was. Well, yeah. I mean, it looks like it turned out that it was just semantic, and we were talking past each other because you were interpreting reply in some kind of more general sense, and the initial proposition was about whether there's any reply that doesn't fall in that category, right? And then by reply, I'm meaning trait. Because I don't think either of us have shifted at all, right? I don't think either of us have. I don't think either of us have changed positions on anything. I think we just
Yeah, of course. Like primary positions, yeah, definitely. I don't think we have. I don't think so.
well, trivially, people
Of course,
change
we had.
by little things like my position on what I thought you said or something like little things like that shift
Yeah,
all
of
the
course,
time.
and I want to clarify one thing. I have said this originally at the start of this conversation that I think we had disagreements, and I still have disagreements with respects to the messages in the chat and my impressions, your impressions, all of this stuff. And I even said I don't think you're being bad faith. I don't think you're hedging. I don't think you're doing any of that stuff. And I mentioned that it could be the case that this was what you meant, etc., etc. And I think, given my approach, or given the precise approach that we're generally going under, this would most likely be what you meant, despite you disagreeing.
I want to
And I'm
push
not
back. Can
going
I
to
push
debate
back
you
on
on that.
that for a sec? Because you keep kind of making that point, and I did say this earlier. It was just in passing, and I didn't want it to become the big focus because I worried I'd lose track of the main
And
thread.
I don't want it to be the big focus, but I mentioned in here that like us agreeing on everything is predicated upon that specific thing, which we don't want to actually swap hands on
It's
type shit.
predicated on us just going with the semantics that I'm saying I intended rather than the ones that you
Yeah, of
suspect
course.
I intended. So
So if my interpretation was correct, then it would be the case that
yeah, yes,
our
yes, yes, yes,
positions
yes.
have
Yeah,
one of our positions.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's all fine. But I will
yeah.
just say with your interpretation. So, firstly, I don't think your interpretation is unreasonable or anything. But one thing I
Yeah.
can't tell if you're saying this or not, but I would view this as unreasonable if you are doing this. Are like I can't tell if you're trying to suggest that I shifted in meaning or something, which I don't really think I've done that. I think that
I think you did. I think you did. But again, I'm saying I don't want to come off as a debate, bro. It's not something I'm interested to go back and forth on. We can just agree to disagree on
well,
this.
I
I
don't want
think,
to
given the reasons I've just said.
I don't want to actually go back and forth on it as in literally trace through the text, so not at that level, but I do kind of just briefly at a high level want to speak about that for a second, which is
Okay.
I do think that this kind of thing happens. Like I say a thing, like reply to NTT, and then you give something that you're thinking of as a reply, and then I'm like, wait, well that's not what I'm thinking of as a reply, and then I make it more precise what I'm saying. So you could say that I didn't have that level of precision in mind initially. And that may or may
Mm-hmm.
not be true. In all honesty, I don't actually remember
Mm-hmm.
I suspect I was thinking about traits, but I'm not 100% sure, but it
Mm-hmm.
nonetheless became clear to me that that's what I'm talking about. Um,
Okay. Except that in the case of what you're talking about, you granted it being a reply, but a reply without specifying the trait. And not only have
reply
you
with
granted it being a reply, but
Yeah, so I'm,
also
and
now you're
also,
saying
could I say
you're not
something to
sure
that? It's
about what you
possible that
mean.
I've used the
Oh, sorry, go for it.
language. Well, it's possible that I've used the language inconsistently. But I guess the thing.
Okay,
So
that's
this is the
fine.
one thing that I don't like about how you approach it. Which I don't know. Maybe we'll just disagree about this. But it feels like you're trying to um like lock in a hyper specific meaning when I'm not being that careful about what I mean. And then you're coming at me really hard on that particular interpretation. I'm like, whoa, like, okay, I'm not saying that's an unreasonable interpretation, but like we have to have some more of like a human dimension where it's like, it's sort of understood that people say things loosely. And then when you start having a conversation, you start going, oh, okay, well, we need to like tighten up exactly what we mean there. Like, I don't mean it in that way. I mean something more like this. And I don't think that
Okay.
I don't like the framing of that. Like, there's any kind of like, I don't know. I don't
Mm-hmm.
like the idea that that's some kind of failure or some kind of like. I just think that's just being a fucking human being. I just think that that's
Okay, yeah,
yeah.
I agree. It's just being a human being, but we have to put into context some stuff, right? So the conversation we have and the nature of that conversation is radically different from just normal conversations. Like, hey, bro, like,
Well, I
what are you
want to
gonna eat
speak to
today? Like,
that.
it's
I want to
and
speak to
I just want
that.
to clarify this
Yeah.
because you made two things, you used like two words or phrases which are just typed out, which I
Uh-huh.
don't really like. So like the loose stuff. So like the nature of the conversation was not like just a loose conversation. You're getting very
I
technical,
disagree.
very precise,
I
very
disagree.
specific. No, wait.
I really disagree. I like what I want to say is that there's certain parts of what you're saying that I'm looking for a lot of clarity on because those are the confusing parts to me. But I think that there's a
Mm-hmm.
misunderstanding if you think that I'm being that careful with everything I'm saying or with everything you're saying. I'm not super careful
Of
with
course,
how
you can quantify the degrees of carefulness across all spectrums about the words I was using, but I'm saying that generally speaking, in practice, we were being careful, and so I'm not saying I don't even think I'm being hyper specific, because even you yourself
No,
said I'm
but
not being
I don't
unreasonable.
like this.
You said this. You said I'm not being unreasonable, right? So I'm not.
I don't no,
I
I
think
don't
when you're going to say,
I don't think
yeah,
you're being
real quickly, just one
unreasonable.
more thing, because
Yeah.
I kind of like finish. I don't
Yeah,
do
sure.
finish real quickly. I was just
Sure.
going to say that, um, considering that we both shook hands on the idea that I was not being unreasonable with my interpretation, I think it's very
I still
unfair
agree. That
and
still is true.
unreason. I think it's unfair to kind of like paint me as being hyper specific, because usually when you're saying, "Hey, bro, you're being hyper specific," or being like a pedantic princess, what's interpreted or being conveyed there is that the person is being unreasonably specific or precise with their
I do think
analysis of the
that.
terms, which we
I,
disagreed on.
I do think that though. So let's
Okay.
just I just want to be clear. It's
Hmm.
possible to be to be holding someone to a kind of unreasonable standard while not being at all, like when I say unfair, I think I'm talking about something closer to bad faith. Like there's a difference between operating in a way that I don't really agree with in some aspects versus having bad intentions or actually trying to be unfair. And I don't think you're trying to be unfair or have bad intentions. At least from what I can tell, there's no indication of that. But I do think that there's certain aspects that I don't really agree with that way of operating. And one of them is just this thing around how carefully you're holding me to things that I've said.
Hmm.
I think that it's fair to like you're the kind of inference you're making is like we're having a precise conversation. Maybe you'll call this a straw man. I can't tell, but this is what it seems like to me. It seems like you're going, we're
Okay.
having a precise conversation, so I can just basically needle you on anything you said and assume you're being hyper precise about that. And if that is what you're saying, which it's what it feels like, but maybe I'm wrong, I don't think that's fair
Or
because I.
sorry, I kind of zoned out for like oh yeah, I
Sorry?
kind of like zoned out. Just repeat from the beginning. Thank you.
Sure,
Yeah.
sorry. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I am saying that it feels to me not like you're being bad faith or anything like that, but there is an aspect of how you're operating that I don't agree with. It's got nothing to do with being bad faith, but I or trying to be unfair or anything like that. I just don't really agree with it. And it sounds like the kind of inference that you're making is like we're having a hyper precise conversation. We were in text. We are in the voice conversation. So it's okay to hold anything that you say to this like really high standard of precision, to assume you're being really precise. And I want to say that that's actually not maybe not not like when I say not fair, I'm not saying you're
Hmm.
trying to be unfair, but I think it is unfair. And the reason is basically there's when I'm being precise in this conversation, it's about certain specific things that are confusing me. Like I was trying to get precise about what you
Hmm.
meant by like I don't fucking remember, but certain terms I was like, okay, I really need to know what's meant there.
The most
But
relevant tenets, right?
exactly, it's not like every
And I
single
think I was doing
thing.
the same thing. I think I'm doing the same thing right now with the reply part. Right? I think that's it, even the most relevant, in my opinion.
Okay, so we disagree
And
about
I would
that.
like to add one
Yeah.
thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I mean we can agree to disagree on that. I don't think that's the major point here. I want to make it clear that what I'm combating here right now is not really what you're saying, but the negative connotation which comes off with the words that you're using, like, oh, we're just having a normal conversation, like not something which you have to be, technical about, and then you say I'm going too hard on you. Like I don't like that framing. I don't like that framing. So you talks about not liking my framing. I think that's same thing applies to me. I don't really like the way that you're framing the way in which I'm approaching your interpretation. Like on one hand, you're claiming that, hey, I agree with you. It's not unreasonable for it to act the way you're acting currently. I don't think you're being
Mm-hmm.
unreasonable with your interpretations. But then you're using other words which have this negative connotation, which opposed what you've said earlier on regarding the unreasonable, sorry, the reasonable nature of my interpretation. Right?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that maybe I've been a bit confusing there. What I want to say is when I'm saying you're not doing so and so, I'm basically just saying you're not being bad faith. Like I'm saying I don't detect. Well, I guess there have been different points in this conversation where I've been referring to different things. There's been times where I've just been saying, this is gonna get confusing. Like, look, I want to just say the core thing. So what you said that you think there's an unfair connotation to what I'm saying, which is that you're being unreasonable. And also that contradicts when I've said you are being reasonable. So I think it's confusing because there also have been different points where I've been using reasonable kind of to refer to bad faith versus to refer to just whether the interpretation, like if I were you, would be an interpretation that I would take or something like that, which is a sort of a standard, I guess, for being reasonable. Would I think in the same way if I were in your shoes? So yeah, and I guess this is what I want to say. I want to say that I think that it's I guess just with words like reply or whatever the word is, I guess it's just not, to me, sorry, I'm getting fucking tired too now, so I'm kind of burning out a bit, but it kind of feels like you're interacting with me like I'm being stricter about what I'm saying than I am. And then when it turns out that I'm not being that strict, it feels like there's a bit of framing from you where I've been unfair or something like that. And I don't like that, I guess, because I feel like I have been fair, and I feel like that's just sort of being a human, and I think that's normal, and I think that's compatible with being precise about some things.
Okay. I think we're just like going back and forth on just these weird connotations slash semantic shenanigans. I don't think it is substantive, although you wanted to touch on this. I don't think there's anything else we need to touch on for the time being. But I was just making it clear that for it to make the claim that there has been no major shift in positions is going to be predicated upon this specific point, which relies upon our interpretations of what he meant by this. And we both agree that something which we don't want to really touch on insofar as debating about this is concerned, even though I think definitely I've given reasons which kind of proves my interpretation over yours, but that's something which I don't think we need to go into right now. I don't think that's something which is relevant.
Well, that doesn't feel fair to me, because it feels like what you're saying is that, yes, okay, we agree that neither of
not
us...
saying to be in bad faith, by the way, which I've clarified previously.
Yeah. So let's neither of us clarify that ever again, because we both know the other person's not being bad faith. But okay, I agree and appreciate that. So what feels unfair, which is compatible with being good faith, is it feels like you're saying, okay, so yes, we've ended up at this place where basically neither of us have been moved at all. Neither of us have moved the other. So we both feel pretty much the same as where we started. But my Apollo, my not having achieved victory is kind of contingent on interpreting you in a particular way. And I think that actually I'm more justified in interpreting you in a different way. So that basically what that actually is saying is like, well, really I won, but if I'm like kind of overly charitable to you in a way I don't actually agree with, then we got nowhere. And I think that that's just, I think that's like totally wrong.
Okay, so I don't think that's wrong, and we can perhaps talk about that. But I think that the conditions would definitely result in, or it would have a major impact on the interpretations of what happened or what the outcome of this conversation is like. Right?
Why can't it just be that when I said the term reply, why can't it just be that I'm not thinking about reply?
I'm not saying it can't be that. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying it can't be that. I'm not ruling that out as a possibility.
Sorry, not
just
can't. That's fair. I guess. Well, maybe. I guess where I kind of want this to land is,
I think what you're really asking is, why don't you just agree with me, right? If that's really what you want. And of course, I've given my reasons as to why I don't agree with you. So that question would be answered.
Well, I don't actually know if I understand your reasons, because to me it sounded like the reason is that we're having a generally precise conversation, so I can assume that when you say, in fact, I don't even totally understand what is the reason that you think that it's right to interpret my initial use of the word reply such that it counts things other than just giving a trait.
Well, it's not. So just to be clear, that sounds like another oversimplification. It's not just count things other than just a trait, but counting things which are more relevant to the question, which is something outside of just a trait.
Yeah, counting at
and
least
I think
one
the reason
thing
behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think the reason behind this, it would be, of course, the very trivially strong inductive case of the words that we both use in this conversation being something which maps onto the face value definition or impression of what the word is actually communicating. And that to
Okay.
be the face value interpretation.
Well, I guess I just will, and you can have the last word if you want, but I guess I'll just say
Gotcha.
for people listening,
Mm-hmm.
when I initially said the word reply, I don't recall if I was literally thinking traits, or I assume I was. I kind of think that I probably was, or if I was just not thinking precisely. But at no point was I thinking in a way where I would class the kind of thing that you're talking about as a reply. So,
I think that,
yeah, I think
yeah, and
that
that's
that's all
fine.
I want
I,
to say.
I think it raises suspicions to hold a strong position on whether or not you're referring to that type of reply being qualified as a reply if you're not even sure about what you meant at the time of making that message, right? I think that raises epistemic suspicions about your current position.
Uh,
Whereas,
so
whereas
how?
me on the
Sorry.
contrary, I have, yeah, whereas me on the contrary, it's not the case that I have any sort of like onshore perspectives on anything. I'm like, so I just think that like the lack of epistemic confidence about what you recalled of referring to or intended to convey originally is something which raises suspicions about your current position about it being the case that my reply would not be something which you were referring to at the time of making that message. And I think, on the contrary, I have more confident reasons for believing that you were referring to that type of thing, given the inductive case being presented. So,
Do
yeah.
you think that if at the outset, sorry, I know I said to give you the last word, but do you think if at the outset, like whenever the word reply was first used, that if you had have said, "Are you counting things like this as a reply?" that I would have said yes to that?
I think you'd have said yes to that, and I also believe that you'd say that it's something that you have not thought of because you have not heard the type of reply to it, right?
You okay, so I that I'm very
Yeah,
sure
I
is
think that's
not
confident.
that I'm very sure is not the case, because if I had have said something like all replies that I'm aware of are inconsistent or absurd, and you had have said, okay, what about a reply that doesn't provide the trait? There is absolutely no way that I would have responded to that by saying that's what I mean by a reply. I would have said that's not the kind of thing I'm talking about as reply, which is exactly what happened in this
Again, this is
conversation.
what I'm talking about, right? The oversimplification, right? So remember the other part, where it's not just, hey, ask yourself, look at this response, no trade being provided, yay, GG's, man, you lost. No,
No,
it's
no,
like
I'm not saying that's
that
all there
in
is to your.
conjunct.
No, I'm not saying that's all
Okay,
there is to
so
your view,
I
but
just
but
don't even.
that is
Okay,
a kind of that's the kind of view that you have, though, right? You have the kind of thing
okay,
that
that's part of the view I have holistically, but that's
yes,
not
but
the
just
view.
but just
Yeah, so we have to be very careful here because there's like some sort of optical picture that's being painted when you just paint it
I
like that, and it's just something
I
which I don't really
I
admire.
okay,
It's not
I don't think so, but I'm happy to say that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to say that's all there
okay.
is to your reply. But what I
Okay.
can tell you, so this is what I okay, so the thing that I'm
Wait.
uncertain
Can I
about.
just wait? Can I just say what I? Okay. So can I just like lay out the reply, and then
Well,
say that
I feel
and
like
just wait, wait,
I want to say
real
what I have
quickly. I
to
just want
say.
to do this. I just want to do this real quickly because like I think we're kind of like not going anywhere
No,
unless I just
but
do
I
this
feel
and
like
just
I'm
wrap
at the
this up.
core point right now. This is very important to me because I don't
Okay, you
like
can go
the
for it
I
first, and then afterwards you can just communicate the point I was just going to mention a while ago. That's fine.
yeah
Yeah,
yeah
go for it.
yeah because I don't like the end move of like no I didn't win, but again, this is an oversimplification. I'll just say that I don't like the end move of I didn't win, but I would have won if my interpretation, which actually is the right interpretation, is the interpretation we took, rather than your like wrong, less justified interpretation. I don't like that move because it basically frames it like you only don't win by being unreasonably charitable to me, and I think that's wrong. And I think this is the kind of thing that really shows that, which is when I first said the word reply, I'm not sure exactly how I was thinking about the term. I just don't remember right now. I suspect that I was thinking about traits because That's normally what I think. But I don't remember the whole exact context. I'm not going to pretend that I remember exactly how it came up. But what I will say with very high certainty is this. If you had have said, do you count something as a reply that doesn't tell you what the trait is, I would absolutely have said no to that. And that's also what happened in the conversation. So I mean, I think
Okay.
that shows that
Well,
what you're
one
saying
thing.
is, well, just let me finish. I think that shows that
Yeah,
your
sure.
kind of contingent victory based on being overly charitable thing is not true. I think that's wrong.
Okay, so I think that if I told you that my reply in chat to the entities, hey, I don't know the trait, but there's objective proof for there being a trait, there's evidence for there being a trait, right? I think with respect to the way in which I'm currently communicating the reply, you'd be like, oh, that's your reply, and then you'd be interested in asking me for the evidence for there being a trait.
Yeah,
Right, I think that's the
it's
approach.
gonna.
I think wait,
Oh, sorry.
because you just complained about
Sorry,
interrupting,
that's
right?
fine. That's fine. Sorry.
I think that's yeah, I think that's the approach that the typical AY would do. Like you'd ask for evidence or justification, right? And I think I had a justification we presented, to which you've agreed there was justification. Another thing rather, I'm not making the claim that I'll be unreasonably charitable. I believe that it's not. I don't think it's unreasonable to be charitable in the sense where I'm interpreting the conversation in the way in which you're interpreting the point about apply stuff. However, I believe that I'll be unjustifiably charitable. I think it is less justified to be charitable to that degree in contrast with just adopting my position or my interpretation, which is realistically charitable or far more realistic. I think it's more realistic to adopt my interpretation of what you meant. However, I'm not making the claim that your interpretation is unreasonable. I'm just saying it is unjustified, right?
I don't think that's right. When I think that when I initially said whatever the sentence was, like that every reply that I've seen, and I suspect any reply that could be given, falls into one of those two categories, that if you had have said, well, okay, would you count as a reply something that doesn't provide the trait? I would have absolutely said no to that, because that's clearly, I mean, it seems to me clearly not what I'm talking about.
Do you not? Is it not the case that originally, like your position is that there's no traits, there's no trait distinction, right?
You're asking like how I answer NTT?
Yeah, like separate from the specific thing we're on. We both agree that prior to me and you talking, your position on this matter is that there's no morally relevant distinction traits wise, right? Like that's your position. It's
I
like your
don't
belief.
name a trait.
Okay, but you're not making the claim on there not being a trait. Is that what you're telling me?
On there not being a trait, as
Yeah.
so well, again, whether there's a trait, it's going to be indexed to the person, right? So from my point of view, it sure seems like there's not a trait.
Mm-hmm.
That's, which is not to say it's impossible that there is one, but yeah, that's my
Okay.
view.
So if I was to tell you that there is a trait and there's evidence for there being a trait, and it's not absurd or contradictory, you don't think you'd be like, okay, I'm gonna want to debate this guy on this. I'm gonna want to press this guy on this specific point. You don't think that would be something which is intriguing?
As in I might want to investigate that reply.
Yes.
So I see the point you're making, and it's fair, but I really think that it's going to depend on the context. What I suspect is happening is I suspect that I might use the word in a general way at some times, but when I'm
Okay.
saying something like all replies are contradictory or absurd, I am absolutely talking about traits when I say something like that. Or minimally,
Okay.
I'm not talking about things that, wait, this is just going to be saying the inverse. I'm definitely not, so again, I think that language is polysemous. I think that we use words in different ways at different times. I think I might use the term reply
Okay.
at times to refer to something more general. I think that's totally
Of
possible.
course. So the pedanticism can just vary over time. Like sometimes we're more pedantic on the words, and sometimes we're less pedantic.
Well,
Of course, yeah.
it's not.
And I'm not
Well, I
disagreeing
wouldn't.
with you.
Wait. That's not quite right. I'm not saying sometimes more, sometimes less pedantic. It's just different senses of the term. So what I can
Of course, yeah.
definitely tell you, but this is what I would say when I make a claim like all traits or all replies either fall into contradictory or absurd, I am talking about traits at that point. Like if you were to ask me, not in general, when I'm talking about, like, look, say that we see someone reply to NTT by saying, well, fuck you, I don't want to have a conversation, which is not, to be clear, I'm not implying that's at all what you did, but just say someone were to say that, right? I might be like, well, that's a retarded reply or something like that, right? I could see how I would use the word reply there. So I get your point. I understand that, let me finish, please. I understand that there are contexts where I might refer to something like that as a reply. But what I'm saying is that one context where there is no way that that's the kind of thing I'm thinking of as a reply is when I say something like, all replies are contradictory or absurd. And the way you can know that is that there's a long record of me talking about things that don't fall into either category, like things that, for instance, where like vague humanity is one, where it's like, okay, we just don't know what you mean, right? I'm not going to say that's contradictory or absurd. So, I mean, it's also, there's another reason, is that it's previously been an articulated part of my position. So, yeah, all I'm really saying here is language is polysemous. I suspect the word reply is used at different times. I suspect that in certain cases, let's just say that let's call this like follow-up alpha, okay? Follow-up alpha is saying, would you class something that doesn't name the trait as a reply? Okay, so I don't have to keep saying that sentence. We're just going to call that follow-up alpha. There are certain instances where I use the word reply, and if you ask me follow-up alpha, wait, this isn't going to work the way I'm framing it. Look, fuck. All I'm trying to say is that there are some cases where I'm using the word where it's probably more broad or more general or something like that. But in the case where I say something like all replies are contradictory or absurd, I'm talking about traits there. I'm not talking about things like not naming a trait. And I think that during the conversation, it became clear you're giving something on that side. And at that point, I made it clear what I'm saying. But to suggest that that means that I like wasn't using the term like that, or wasn't using it in a way where if you had have prompted me in that exact same way at the time, I wouldn't have replied like that. That I just think is wrong. I think it's because I'm just looking at my own thoughts, and it's totally clear to me.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Could I just make a response real quickly, because it's been going on for a while?
Sure.
Not to be disrespectful.
That's okay.
I was just going to say
been going on for a while.
that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I agree with you that, yeah, of course, language is polysemous, and of course, you can have different senses of the word that's been applied based off the different contexts. Of course, language is very context sensitive. However, I think that, and this might kind of like tick you off a little bit because you're kind of like a little bit complaining about this, but like originally you're like saying that, well, you are not sure what you meant at the time by reply, but what you're sure is that my response would not be classified as one. And now you're saying, hey, what I meant by reply here was trait in a confident, sure manner. So I'm like, which one is it? Is it the case of confidence?
I can clarify that. What I mean is if you prompt me. So if you prompt me with something like follow-up alpha, I'm absolutely going to respond the same way to that any time that I say a sentence like any trait is contradictory or absurd. I would have said that before the debate. I would have said that a year ago. I would have said that during... I don't even know if I'd call this a debate, but I would have said it during this conversation. Yeah, that has been the case for a very long time.
Cool. I think we've both given our reasons, and they've been going on for a pretty long while, to be honest. I've given my reasons for believing in my interpretation. You've given your reasons for believing in your interpretation. Of course, you're the speaker, and you have all privilege to say, hey, this is what I meant by XYZ, which, of course,
sorry, I know you're saying something. Maybe I'm being a bit rude by cutting in. I'm not, but do you actually think that if you had have asked me at the time when I very first said all replies are contradictory or absurd, do you think if you had have said follow-up alpha at that time that I wouldn't have given the exact answer that I'm giving now?
Before you even answer the question, I'm not saying you're doing this. Your question comes off as performative because you've asked me this question previously, to which I've said yes, definitely. So it kind of comes off as like
sorry.
Yeah.
When you say yes, definitely.
I'm just giving. Okay, I'm just giving you my impression.
When you say yes, definitely, I just don't know which way you mean. Like yes, definitely, you agree, or
yes,
definitely,
I believe. Yes, then I believe that you'd have granted this to be a reply.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry, I'm not trying to be. Wait, 1 second. Just 1 second, Apollo. I'm not trying to be performative, but I didn't. If you said that, I actually didn't detect that. I didn't realize that. So, If you said that, though, it sounds like we agree. So it sounds like the contingent victory point kind of goes away, and it's like, okay, we just both had a conversation. We don't persuade anyone, and on
No. I'm saying that I agree. No, I'm saying that I believe that you would have granted what I said to be a reply, not that I agree that you'd have granted it
you
to
think
not
that
be a
if you had
reply.
have done follow up alpha, that I would have said yes, that's a reply.
Yes, and then you'd ask
Oh,
me for the
okay.
evidence for the trade distinction. That's
Okay,
what I.
so
Yeah,
yeah,
but
so
then this
this
is why.
time this time
Because
wait
you've been
wait
interrupting.
this time I
Because you've been
genuinely
interrupting.
no, one second, this time I genuinely will give you the last word, and you may have as long as you want, but I just want to say my
Okay,
very
got
final thing about that. And sorry for
you.
saying a bit more than you and being a bit too talky in the last minute. I apologize, but just
Got you.
that I think is very wrong. And I think that one easy way to see it's wrong is just that for years I've pointed out that there's things that aren't contradictory, absurd, like vague humanity. You can go on as long as you want now. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to wrap this up, I just think that when you're going to be asking that question, it just comes off as a bit performative. It comes off as like, do you actually think this? Like genuinely, like seriously? Like, yes, I do seriously believe this. I've given my reasons, which I think is reasonable. You yourself even said that I was not even being unreasonable about my interpretation about what you said originally. So you cannot say that I'm being unreasonable about my interpretation of the wordings that you've used in that specific moment in time in the conversation. And simultaneously, I think I've given sufficient evidence for that being something which you've met. And of course, this is not something which I wanted to be going back and forth on. We both didn't want to go back and forth on this, but he kind of like drew the conversation onto that point because of the contingency of the vector point stuff.
Yeah.
And so that's where we've been on this. And so that's basically it. We can agree
I
to disagree on the
I
interpretation stuff.
just
And that,
I'm
and
sorry.
just to be clear, I definitely believe just up.
I'm sorry.
Just
I
so
know
that's
I
gonna have
said
the last
I'd give you
word.
the last word. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. I will ultimately give you the last word, but when you say performative, I just want you to understand from my point of view the reason that
No, I said it comes off as performative. I'm not saying you're being performative.
fair. I just want to say the reason that I re-ask is because I thought I provided more information that might have changed your evaluation. I'm not trying to just ask the same thing to dunk or something like that. I thought the stuff about
Okay.
mentioning vague humanity, that I've previously had the position, blah blah blah, that might cause a different
Mm-hmm.
evaluation.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. That's fine. So all I'm saying is, of course, you're going to agree to disagree on the debate over what interpretation is correct. I think for sure that given the original facts that you're being agnostic or unconfident or unsure about what you meant at the time, and then you making the confident assertion afterwards, I think that places into question or raises suspicions about the reliability of your voucher testimony.
But
Whereas
I've
on the
resolved
contrary, I think I've
that.
presented
But
evidence.
I think I've
Whereas
resolved
real
that.
quickly,
But I think I've.
I mean, of course, you have, and you can. Okay, so since
But what
I'm,
do you know?
I'll just give
Did
you
you
the
catch
last.
my
I just want to
reply to
finish my
that?
point first, please.
Did
Oh,
you
look, I'll just
catch my
real
reply to
quickly. Let me
that
just like,
part that you just said though?
yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. I'm just saying that like that's my personal belief, independently of your reply to that. I'm not saying that your reply was unsuccessful. This is just like a summary of what was going on and what motivates me to have in my personal view on my interpretation being something which stands. I'm not giving like some
Yeah,
justification for why it stands right now, just
but
to make that clear.
yeah, but
And
just
lastly,
well, wait before the next point. Just on that point. So this, I think,
okay,
reconciles that perceived tension there, which you're using to kind of buttress your interpretation. So the
okay,
thing that's unclear to me is I don't remember if I was consciously thinking trait or broad or whatever when I'm saying that. But what I know is that if you prompt me with, with follow up alpha, that I'm going to respond in the same way. That's the thing that I have total
mm-hmm.
confidence about. So when I talk about what I mean, I guess we might have to be more clear about that, but I mean the kind of meaning that I will converge on having if you prompt me in the relevant ways, not just what's like in my mind at the
Okay.
time. Yeah.
So it's conditionalized upon a specific prompt. So it's sensitive to
Yeah,
initial conditions. Gotcha.
I think so.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Yeah, of course, I think the supposed inductive thing it presented would suffice, and that's all. So all I have to say is we can just agree to disagree on this. And the fixture thing is contingent upon that point, which we just argued upon, and that's basically it. It was a good conversation,
Yeah.
and hopefully we don't have to mention anything else or going into any more semantical shenanigans or anything like that. moving
Nope.
forward, and we can just like end things, because I'm pretty sure your brain is burnt out and I'm getting tired and
Very.
shit. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah, totally. And yeah, so I appreciate the conversation. Good conversation.
Mhm.
And we should follow up at some point to talk about NTT, how you might
Yeah.
reply to trying to draw the line.
You should accept my request, and you can just DM me anytime, and you can just tell me when you're down to have another conversation about NTT. Okay?
Sure. Sounds good. Okay. All right. Have a good night. It was good talking to you.
And about the recording stuff, you're gonna just send it to me like DMs or something?
I'll
or...
just upload it on the archive channel and you can just pull it off that.
Okay, got you.
Yep. Cool.